So while we're still in meditative mode, we'll contemplate our motivation for the day, using points that Lama Zopa wrote in the prayer we'll be using. So I'll just read little bits of it and then meditate on that. So first I'll just read the very beginning. From beginningless samsaric lifetimes until now, I have experienced the general sufferings of samsara numberless times, and especially the sufferings of the three lower realms. There is no suffering that I have never experienced. When I think deeply about all of this, I am gripped with terror and weep uncontrollably. Therefore, I must no longer allow myself to fall under the control of the disturbing, unsubdued mind, which are the causes that oblige me to experience the result of true suffering. So there we're contemplating the true cause of suffering and the truth of suffering. So we're seeing that the true cause of suffering is not outside of us, it's in my own mind. My own disturbing, unsubdued mind. That's caused me to experience samsaric suffering. Right, the general sufferings of samsara, and then the specific sufferings of different realms. Over and over, beginninglessly. That means infinitely. As long as I happily continue to follow these evil, disturbing, unsubdued minds, with neither fear nor doubt, there is no difference between me and a mindless, crazy person. If I continue to follow wrong concepts, I merely ensure that I will keep suffering for countless lives to come. And when I think about this from the depths of my heart, beyond mere words, I am unable to eat by day or sleep by night. It makes me vomit uncontrollably. Thinking of my foolishness breaks my heart. So then we think, so in the context, right, of that infinite, beginningless samsara of suffering, now I have received the inner condition, the precious human body, endowed with 8 freedoms and 10 endowments, that gives me the ability to achieve all happiness and perfection. And I have also met the outer condition, the holy Mahayana virtuous friend, who is extremely difficult to find, but can, in a single second, grant the highest state, the omniscient mind of a Buddha. And as well as the inner and outer conditions, I have met the teachings of the Buddha, the supreme medicine that expels without exception all the sufferings of migratory beings. So having looked at like the measureless suffering of samsara, now we think of our great good fortune, having a human body, human brain, having met the teachings of the Buddha, Mahayana virtuous friend, and having all the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments of a precious human rebirth. So given my incredible good fortune, if I continue to seek mere temporal happiness, or my own personal liberation from the bondage of the disturbing, unsubdued minds and karma, what difference is there between me and a foolish, dumb animal? Such an attitude would be extremely upsetting from several viewpoints. From my own side, how shameless. From the side of others, how ungenerous, how selfish and cruel. How dare I cherish only myself and totally renounce the welfare of others? Aren't other sentient beings the precious ones from whom I have received all happiness and perfection? I must understand that it is inadequate merely to ensure that I shall not be reborn in the suffering lower realms, nor is it enough to seek simply my own release from samsara. All sentient beings have been my mother. There is not a single one who is not. Moreover, each has been my mother, time without number, and each time has been just as kind to me as the present mother. At this very moment, not only are all those kind mother sentient beings experiencing great suffering, but they are also running constantly to create the causes for more suffering. There is not even a second during which they can experience a moment's happiness. If a mother's suffering is not alleviated by her own child, then who else will do it? So with this part of the contemplation, right, we're seeing others as kind and precious, so kind and so precious to us, but also as suffering terribly. So even though it is up to me alone to bear the burden of eradicating the suffering of all mother sentient beings, at the moment I am incapable of relieving the suffering of even one sentient being. Yet if I receive the enlightened body, the holy body of a Buddha, just one ray of its light could ripen the minds of countless sentient beings, leading them to the state of greatest peace. Therefore, to release all mother sentient beings from suffering and lead them to the sublime happiness of enlightenment, I must attain the exalted state of Buddhahood. The attainment of Buddhahood is not without causes or conditions. Its principal cause is the two Bodhicittas. Therefore, I'm going to practice the profound oral teachings on transforming the mind into Bodhicitta. So now that's our motivation for today. So we're engaging in these practices today together, this retreat together, because not just ourselves, but all sentient beings who are more kind and precious than gold or diamonds or jewels, are suffering. And so out of love and compassion, we're taking the responsibility to free ourselves and others from that limitless ocean of suffering. So to accomplish that, we have to achieve Buddhahood. Therefore, we're, out of love and compassion, we're striving for enlightenment of Buddhahood. So we're practicing with Bodhicitta motivation. So then in the space in front of you, about one prostration's length in front of you, at the level of your forehead, visualize the Buddha of compassion, Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha who is the embodiment of the compassion of all the Buddhas. So, actually, Avalokiteshvara is inseparable from the Dalai Lama. And I also think that Avalokiteshvara is inseparable from your own teacher, your own root guru. But here we visualize Avalokiteshvara white, with a white-colored body, made of light. I think and then depending on your visualization capacity, if you're very good at visualizing, you can visualize the 1,000-armed form of Avalokiteshvara. If that's too difficult, then you can just do the 4-armed, or if that's too difficult, then a 2-armed Avalokiteshvara. But with a body made of wisdom and compassion, white in color, translucent, and radiant. And since we're striving to realize bodhicitta, then we naturally take refuge in Avalokiteshvara. And in some sense, Avalokiteshvara also represents our own capacity for compassion and for Buddhahood. And so, fearing our own suffering, fearing others' suffering, fearing to remain unenlightened, right? We turn to that Avalokiteshvara made of light in front of us with a heartfelt feeling of turning to him for guidance, for refuge, for protection, for inspiration, for blessings. And then in the prayer book on page 159, I think we can read together the 7-limbed prayer. If you do want to first touch it. So the 7-limbed prayer is to Avalokiteshvara himself, who we're visualizing, and that prayer is on page 159. In 159, where it says 7-limbed prayer, or the page number's the same? Oh, is it 160 in yours? Some of them maybe have different page numbers?
Yeah, 159.
It says 7. Okay, so some of the page numbers might be different, but it's the thought transformation section and the 7-limbed prayer. Reverently I prostrate to Guru Avalokiteshvara with body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence, and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. Because of the merits of myself and others, may the 2 bodhicittas ripen, and may I achieve great enlightenment for the sake of all. And we'll keep going. We'll do the mandala offering then. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. May the Guru's life be long. May all beings equaling space receive happiness and comfort. May I and others, without exception, accumulate merit, purify obscurations, and quickly receive enlightenment. Precious Guru, please grant me all realizations of the path, from Guru devotion to the completion of training, the unified Vajra state. Please grant me the blessings that my mind become the Dharma, that the Dharma will become the path, that hindrances in the path may not occur, and that I may cease all wrong conceptions and receive immediately the 2 precious bodhicittas. Yadam Guru Radha Mandala Guru Avalokiteshvara is extremely pleased by your request, and together with the moon, disk, and the lotus, descends to the crown of your head. Okay, so now you're thinking of your Guru in the form of translucent, clear, white colored Avalokiteshvara on the crown of your head. in his heart, he has, right in the middle of his heart, right, because his body's unobstructed, right? It's not solid. There's a syllable Kri. And if you want, actually, around the Kri, you can imagine his mantra. Om Mani Padme Hum. And so then we'll read each of these verses. These are the 8 verses of mind training. So we'll read each verse, but we'll read one verse aloud, and then we do a short visualization. So first let's visualize. Let's read verse 1. Determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, I shall hold them most dear at all times. So now, imagine that white light and nectar, and the nectar is also in the nature of light, pours down from Avalokiteshvara. So it's filling your body, and that nectar is in the nature of the blissful realizations and the stages and paths to enlightenment. Especially of Bodhichitta. But imagine your body being filled from the bottoms of your toes all the way up with that blissful white nectar. And it cleanses away any obstacles to holding others dear, to holding others as so precious, like wish-granting jewels. And it completely fills you up with all realizations of love, of compassion, of bodhicitta that holds others as dear and precious, and holds everyone with great affection, sees everyone as infinitely precious, more precious than diamonds, more precious than wish-granting gems, more precious than billions of dollars. So now you're kind of imagining your body completely in the nature of white light and nectar, like vibrating almost with the energy of pure love, of pure compassion, of cherishing others and seeing them as precious. Then we can read verse 2 together. When in the company of others, I shall always consider myself the lowest of all, and from the depths of my heart hold others dear and supreme. So again, the white light and nectar descend, completely filling your body from the bottoms of the soles of your feet, all the way to the crown of your head, completely removing any arrogance, pride, self-importance, or pretense. And again, completely filling you with love, compassion, bodhicitta, that cherishes others with humility and with sincerity from the heart. Again, your body becomes in the nature of white light, pure, pristine light, in the nature of bodhicitta, cherishing others humbly and sincerely. So we read verse 3. Vigilant, the moment the delusion appears in my mind, endangering myself and others, I shall confront and avert it without delay. So again, white light, nectar pour down into you, purifying any laziness or any just habitual disinterest, actually, and confronting your own delusions, afflictive emotions. granting you the joyful effort, the energy, the inspiration, so that you will confront your delusions the moment they arise. I'm granting you Bodhichitta, and also the wisdom of emptiness, the two supreme antidotes to delusions. So you can have great success in overcoming all of your delusions, your afflictive emotions. Again, your body's in the nature of pristine, luminous, white, light nectar. Then we can read verse 4. Whenever I see beings who are wicked in nature and overwhelmed by violent negative actions and suffering, I shall hold such rare ones dear as if I had found a precious treasure. Again, the white light and nectar descend. In this case, they purify any tendency you have to see negative, wicked, harmful beings as not valuable, to devalue them, to not loving them, cherishing them. And again, the nectar and light grant you bodhicitta, love, compassion, that embraces all beings, even those of wicked nature. Perhaps especially those of wicked nature. Verse 5. When out of envy others mistreat me with abuse, insults, or the like, I shall accept the defeat and offer the victory to others. So now as the light and nectar descend, they purify the tendency to want yourself to win and others to lose. Whether it's like to win an argument, or to seem like the person who's right, or seem like the person who's more deserving. Any habit you have of wanting to see yourself up and someone else down, interpersonally. And it grants you the realization of happily accepting, of giving others the victory and accepting defeat. Also the realizations of love, compassion, and bodhicitta. Verse 6. When someone whom I have benefited and in whom I have placed great hopes, regard that person as my holy guru. So again, the lights and nectars descend. And so this verse, right, with this verse we're purifying, right? This is especially about people close to us, actually, right? People we've helped in some way. So that would be like family members. Number one would be family members, and then friends, and maybe coworkers. People we've gone to great lengths, right, and given a lot to. So when they disappoint our expectations, or hurt us, it's to view them as our guru. So the nectar grants us, purifies the tendency to not see them as the guru, right? To see them as a problem. And the nectar, light rays, completely fill our body, so we're pristine, luminous light, granting us love, compassion, bodhicitta, and the ability to see those who have disappointed our expectations as our guru, our teacher, guiding us to enlightenment. In verse 10. In short, both directly and indirectly, do I offer every happiness and benefit to all mother sentient beings. I shall secretly take upon myself all their harmful actions and suffering. So this verse, again, light rays and nectar descend. Completely purifying any hints of self-cherishing, egotism. Completely filling your body with that blissful light and nectar. The soles of your feet to the crown of your head, even to the tips of your fingers. Your entire body is made of luminous, pristine light. Granting you the ability of Tonglen, right? The ability of secretly taking on the problems of suffering and sufferings of others and giving them happiness. And through this blessing you become like all the bodhisattvas, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, right? Who happily and joyfully, with great joy and bliss, actually takes on all kinds of difficulties to benefit others, right? But experiences those what to us would seem like difficulties with bliss and joy, right? And in being of service to others. So happily taking on the difficulties of others, granting them all happiness and joy. Then verse 8. Undefiled by the stains of the superstitions of the 8 worldly concerns, may I, by perceiving all phenomena as illusory, be released from the bondage of attachment. So again, lights and nectars descend. Freeing you from the purifying any habit of following the 8 worldly concerns, right? Being concerned about superficial things of this life, like your reputation, status, comfort, wealth. And granting you all realizations, especially the realization of understanding emptiness, and all phenomena as illusory. This verse refers to granting you the blessings to perceive the emptiness of inherent existence. The wisdom that understands how things, because they're dependently arising, they're empty. And because they're empty, they're dependent arising. So then we can recite the completion verse there. Most compassionate one, please extend your holy hand and lead me and all the sentient beings into your blissful pure realm after this life. Be our virtuous friend forever and quickly lead us to Buddhahood. Now, again, one more time, the nectars descend into you. This time they purify everything, right? So any diseases, any physical ailments, any subtle imbalances in your body, subtle imbalance of your elements, your negative karma, your afflictive emotions, right? Your tendencies towards anger, pride, jealousy, attachment, aversion, ignorance. And granting you all the realizations, right? From guru devotion, understanding the precious human rebirth, to impermanence and death, renunciation of samsara, Bodhichitta, and 6 perfections up to including the realization of emptiness. So imagine your body is completely in the nature of light, that you're kind of granted all the realizations of the path up to Buddhahood itself. Now for a little while we'll recite the mantra of the Buddha of Compassion. And while you recite that, you can imagine radiating from your own heart light rays in the nature of Avalokiteshvara's enlightenment. And as they go out, there's actually an Avalokiteshvara, a tiny Avalokiteshvara on the tip of each light ray with infinite light rays. Those Avalokiteshvaras reach all sentient beings and go to their crown, pour nectar into them, and guide them and teach them until they become Buddhas as well. So we can just recite Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani. as you continue reciting the Om Mani Padme Hum, in a general sense, you can imagine, those Avalokiteshvaras leading everyone to Buddhahood. Then also you can think of specific sufferings. Right? So you can think of, like, for example, the people of Tibet who are suffering, right, being liberated from that. People of Syria who are undergoing terrible situation right now, right? It brings peace there. Then people, and you can think of different things, right? People who are suffering from addictions, that their addictions get healed. People who are suffering from diseases, that those diseases get healed. People who are angry, that they become patient. People who are terrified, that they feel safe. People who are terribly selfish, that they learn compassion. And so on. You can be creative with that. With the feeling as you're reciting Om Mani Padme Hum, may they be free from suffering. May they be happy. And together we can just read the dedication verses. May all the sufferings and causes of suffering of all sentient beings ripen upon me right now, and may all sentient beings receive all my happiness and virtue. May the precious Bodhichitta that has not yet arisen grow, and may that which has been generated never degenerate, but increase forever more and more. May I never be discouraged for even a moment from practicing the deeds of the Bodhisattvas for the sake of others, by completely renouncing anything done for my own sake, and engaging in the holy actions of the kind founder, Shakyamuni Buddha. Through the merits, may I quickly attain the state of the great compassionate one, and without exception, in all other sentient beings, ennobled to that enlightened state. So pause. I'm just any questions or comments about that? We've never done that practice before together. This particular one, right? This short sadhana. Any questions or comments about that? The practice or those 8 verses? So it's easy for everybody to accept those ideas about when you've really tried to help somebody and they treat you terribly, to view them as your teacher. Nobody has questions. That's easy. I already do that. And when you find really wicked people, then immediately you think, oh, that's like a precious treasure. It's much better than winning the lottery. Right? I don't want to win the lottery. I want to find really difficult. That's natural to you. You get the sense there how those verses, right? These are the 8 verses of Mahayana thought, mind training, right? Yeah, so it's actually every one of those verses is the exact opposite, right, of how we usually think, right? Did you notice that? So the mind training is of a bodhisattva, right? So I guess part of that is, right, so bodhisattvas, I guess the idea there, right, is so bodhisattvas view things the opposite of how we ordinarily view them, right? Like what we find unpleasant, they find pleasant. And what we find pleasant, they find unpleasant, actually. So something about the way bodhisattvas view. Right, like if we defeat somebody, right, then we think that's good, right? Like if you watch sporting events, right, when somebody wins, right, if they like when a boxer knocks out the other person, right, then they start jumping up and down, they're so happy, right? Whereas the bodhisattva views it the exact opposite. It'd be terrible, right? From a bodhisattva's point of view, that would be a terrible suffering, right? to hurt somebody else or defeat somebody. And for us, we like it a lot if people treat us with a lot of respect, because bodhisattvas don't have any interest in it, right? Like they don't care if people treat them with it, right? Also, like we want people to like us, bodhisattvas don't care if people like us.
So what do they think about, like, there's a question now, like, say like, they want to attack Syria, right? And then, so what do they think, like, I mean, they are bombing, they are using chemicals on people, and then they want to attack to stop, to prevent them using, so I mean, how do Bodhisattvas think, how would they think, what would they say?
I mean, it's a little funny, right? I mean, the Dalai Lama often talks about, right? I don't know what a bodhisattva thinks, because I'm not a bodhisattva, but the Dalai Lama often comments on these kind of things, right? Where he talks about how, he's saying, like, for example, like, actually, I once heard the Dalai Lama talking about this. He said, he was talking about this. He said he was talking about war, right? And they said in war, it's true, right? So any war, like so many soldiers are killed by what they call friendly fire, right? And so the Dalai Lama was saying, so that when the bullet goes into your body, and as you're dying, do you think, oh, that was a friendly bullet? Oh, I'm glad that bullet was friendly, no problem, right? Like, in other words, he was saying it's so silly, right? Like, in other words, and the point there is, like, if you're the person who's near, right, Zoe, in other words, and we know that, right? You can't help but kill, what's the word? Collateral damage, right? They always call that. Collateral damage means just people who are walking by, right? And so if you think from the point of view of, like, actually, I often think this way. If you think from the point of view of the mother, right? Somebody dies, right? And then their mother is mourning them. So does the mother think, oh, well, one mother lost a child to a chemical weapon attack, and the other mother lost their child because an American bomb fell on them when they were trying to kill somebody who was going to launch chemical. Like, I don't think the one mother has less grief, right? Like, oh, well, at least it was an American bomb. Phew, okay, I'm okay, then it's okay, my child's dead. There's no feeling like that, right? In other words, if you think, I mean, that's what Dalai Lama's getting. He's getting at just a basic human level. Like, when the person themselves is dying, they don't care, oh, who shot. It's not like, oh, a Syrian shot me versus a British person shot. There's no feeling like that, right? It's like, I'm dying now. And the same thing, if it's your child who died, right? You don't care who, I mean, you care who killed them, but it's not like, it doesn't make it better. Oh, well, you know, NATO forces killed my child, not rebels, so then it's no big deal, right? So there is, I mean, that's often, I mean, many times the Dalai Lama talks about that, right? And then he says, and then also, like, if it's your father, right? Like, so your father was killed, right? And so, like, what's it say? One is it doesn't help, right? Or you still don't have a father. And the other is that's how it creates a cause of more conflict in the future, right? Because then, of course, that child grows up with anger, right? At somebody for killing, and then it creates a cause of more. So that's why the Dalai Lama is always saying, you know, always is emphasizing nonviolent, you know, nonviolent means of.
So like Tibet, like Tibet, if you like, you know, they attacked China and the cycle's got to keep going.
Yeah, it'll go forever. Then.
So if you stop, it just stops.
And the part of it is like, this is what I think there's a difference. This is my own opinion now. If you look at people like the Dalai Lama or you know, Gandhi, or just we were celebrating Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, right, in Washington. Like, if you actually look at the quotes from all three of them, actually, all three of them had in common taking a very long-term vision, right? That speech by Martin Luther King Jr., right? He says, "I have a dream that someday this will happen, someday that will happen." And if you hear the Dalai Lama, right, he said, like, you know, for many years, right, he said, eventually I'll return to Tibet and things will be better. But there's not the idea, I have to make it happen now, right? Because if you feel like I have to make it happen now, then you go to desperate things, right? And you're willing to harm the other person to get what you want, and you don't think about the long-term consequence. And so I think that's one difference, is that nonviolent approach takes it can be slower, but it also takes a longer-term perspective. It's not always slower. If you look in the, like, for example, between the, you know, what's it called, Palestinians and the Israelis, you know, they're using violence, and it's not happening. Nothing's happening fast either. So it's not that violence is always fast, but the nonviolent approach, that is a difference, though, right? It takes a very long-term view, I think, and so you know, so the Dalai Lama is always saying that. He's saying you know, when he talks to Dalai Lama, he's not only talking about karma. Of course, he talks about that, but even just in this life, right? He talks about that, right? Like that. If the goal is to create a peace that will last thousands of years. Because, like, actually, you know, if you hear, right, that's why, like, I'm just using that example, right, I don't know much about it, really, but if you hear some little interviews, right, then what they're saying is, like, well, they'll intervene, but they don't really know, how does that create a permanent solution? They have no idea, actually, right? Whereas there's no concept of a permanent solution. And what the Dalai Lama often emphasizes, and I think the idea behind nonviolence is, you know, to be violent and have people, to kill somebody, where you don't have a clear idea that it's going to bring a long-term benefit and peace. You know, it's one thing if you know, there are some examples of a bodhisattva where if they can say, okay, if they killed one person and it could save thousands of lives and lead to many years of peace, okay, at least that's logical, right? But if you don't have a clear idea how it's going to, then even to take one life, if it's not clear it's going to lead to some kind of permanent or long-term betterment for a lot of people, it seems quite silly.
That's kind of scary, though. Yeah. Because, like, if you're someone in charge, you're like a president, you're the one who creates big negative karma.
Yeah.
Bigger than all. That's kind of sad, actually.
It is sad, yeah. It's the worst thing, like, because if you think about being a president, right, like, it's so easy to, you know, like, actually, I often think that, like, you know, because an ordinary person, right, if an ordinary person goes out and murders one person, it's actually kind of a big deal, right? Yeah. Whereas if you were suddenly president, right? Yeah. Then it's not like, nobody's going to say, oh, I'm holding you accountable, right? All you have to do is sign a piece of paper. Yeah. Right? You make one phone call, right? And then so many people can be. So it's like a terrible job, actually. Yeah. There's a famous letter, right? Like that Nagarjuna, you know, the great Indian, he wrote to a king, right? The letter to a king. And he says that to the king, you know, because he says, actually, you're king, right? And he tells him all these good things he can do as king. But then he says, but if, you know, he points out, he says, from the precious human rebirth point of view, right? He says, like, basically, you've been in the lower realms for countless eons, now for a brief period you have human life and human body, and you happen to be a king, right? And he says, now if you use this life just to kill people, right? Like then where are you going to go in the future? And then it was a complete waste, actually, right? He points that out. He says to the king, then what was the point of all that, just you had a life and you killed some people, and maybe your kingdom was a little more powerful for a few years, but then you're gone, all your subjects are, you take that karma with you and nobody cares, right? Like, so you were a little more, like nobody even remembers. Actually, it's true, right? Like later, nobody cares, actually. But like, maybe it increased that person's popularity, or what's the word there? That, they had a little more property or a little more reputation for a short time.
Yeah.
It's so terrible. And so it's a much faster way to create a lot of bad karma being in power, right? Unless you do it without killing, for example. Yeah. Yeah, and for us, actually, I'll just make a comment on that, just since we're talking about news, like a Buddhist comment, really, which is also, we talk about it a few times in class, but how if you rejoice in positive actions, you create so much merit, right? So if you think about the activities of bodhisattvas or the Buddha, and you think how wonderful that is, right? Or you think of anybody who's doing good things, then you create a lot of merit. But actually the Buddhist teachings say, if you rejoice in bad actions, you create a lot of negative karma, just the same like person who does it, right? And so they say often, like Lama Zopa often points out, he says like, if you read the biographies of holy beings and rejoice, then you're creating so much merit. But they say if you watch the news and you rejoice, mostly it's bad things, right? And then if you rejoice, like, so if you think, like, so if you're watching the news and you think, oh, that's great, the opposite of this, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think, like, oh, that's great, like, my country won, and they killed, and you're rejoicing that they did something where, and sometimes thousands of people were killed, right? Then just by rejoicing, you create a lot of bad karma. So Lama Zopa points out, he says, when you're watching the news, if you watch the news, then to be mindful in this way. Because otherwise, it's like, you were saying how it's bad, it could be bad to be president, but actually we could create the same bad karma so easily if we think like, let's say you don't like a certain country, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't like the people in that country for some reason, like some idea, right? And then something terrible happens in that country and you think, oh, that's great. Then it's the same, like...
Because like sometimes you end up like, you get caught up in the middle, like you're so excited, you don't know, so that's negative karma too.
Yeah,
because like you're watching, you get excited.
Of watching what though?
Like say, oh, you want to know what happens, if they bombed or whatever.
Yeah.
So that excitement is negative karma.
Yeah, if it's happiness, that some so for example, I remember like during the sometimes they were showing like where like all these bombs, it was like America was attacking, I guess it was Iraq at the time, right? And they were showing like all those bombs falling and things exploding, and and a lot of people were like so happy, right? Yeah. But meanwhile, like children are dying, right? There's some children there for sure, right? Innocent people are dying. And so for sure, right, if you're thinking, oh, that's great, and you're rejoicing because you're seeing a lot of explosions, and meanwhile children and innocent people are dying, then yeah, for sure, it's terrible karma. Because you're feeling happy at the suffering of others. That's the exact opposite, right? That's the opposite of compassion, right? It's actually like, so it's a terrible negative state of mind, actually, right? And it's strange how we can do that. Human beings do that so easily, like in times of war, where you never would do that, right? If you saw somebody walk up to a child on the street and start killing them, nobody would think, oh, that's great. It's the same thing, actually, right? The suffering is the same, and the result is, but we rejoice in it if we feel more distant and somehow we have some idea, oh, it's our country and somebody else's country. And we forget the humanity, it seems like, right? I think so. So yeah, but anyway, yeah, that's a great example. Anyway, we'll meditate more. I mean, I just want to see if people have questions about anything. Any other questions? Or should we meditate more? Well, maybe we'll meditate on equanimity, because we were going to go through all the meditations of Bodhichitta, and then in the afternoon we'll emphasize meditating some on Tonglen, taking and giving. But I thought it's good before we do Tonglen to go through the other ones that build up to it. Otherwise, Tonglen's not that effective if you don't. It's effective anyway, but it's more effective if you do the preliminaries to it. So whether you do them and it comes after. In other words, really, I'll just say that too, because like in a lot of you could do Tonglen anytime, of course, taking and giving meditation. But if you study the teachings, actually, usually, Tonglen is done after. You could do it in daily life, but you also integrate it into these other practice. So if you never do the other practices, your tonglen won't be as powerful, of course, right? But if you do the other preliminary ones, like equanimity and viewing others as precious and the faults of self-cherishing, the advantage of cherishing others, if you go through all those things, then your tonglen practice will be much more powerful. Whereas if you don't do those, it won't be as powerful, right? That's why they come. That's why it comes at the end of those. So I'm just saying it's good to integrate it in with the other practices. The tonglen. Oh, thank you. Allergies.
So do I.
Yeah.
I empathize.
But okay, so let's do the first of the two. Or this is not equalizing self now. But it's the equanimity of friends, enemies, and strangers. So this time let's start with a neutral person, right? With somebody we're usually indifferent towards. And actually, so when you do this meditation, it's more effective if you bring to mind a specific person. So, so you can think of somebody at like somebody you drove by outside, on the way here, or somebody who works at the, a sandwich shop or a grocery store, or like a friend of a friend's friend kind of thing. Somebody you've seen somewhere who doesn't evoke who you don't think of as an enemy and you don't think of as a friend, who you have a kind of neutral feeling towards. Could be the person who serves you coffee sometimes, or the worker in the gas station. Somebody you don't have a strong relationship with. And then really notice. So when you bring that person to mind, imagine, think of them or visualize them or imagine them, or remember them. And honestly check your own feeling. And if you check it through introspection, honestly, right, what you find is, right now, right, wow, I feel totally, when I saw that person, right, and when I bring them to mind, my initial reaction is actually indifference. Right? Like I don't care about them. Almost, like I sort of vaguely, I recognize they exist actually, but before I started this meditation, it was almost like they were like they had slightly more status in my mind than a machine. Right? Like when I walk by a car, I notice it exists. Right? Or when I walk by a tree or a manhole or something, right? I notice they exist, but I don't have any strong feeling. I felt towards that person almost like that. The way I feel towards a manhole when I pass by. Right? Like almost nothing. No feeling, no sense of their individuality, of their aspirations, of their suffering, of their hopes or their dreams. Just like I don't care. Not wanting to harm them, but just really not caring about them at all. Almost not caring enough to want to harm them. It's like total indifference. Almost like they're like just barely existing. Actually, you can see, right, if you check, this is just our own honest introspection. That's a completely self-centered attitude. Actually, right? In other words, I don't care about them just because they haven't done anything for me. If they were suddenly to help me with something, if my car broke down and they helped me a lot, if they said a few nice things to me, if I were suddenly sick and they helped me with that, went out of their way to a large extent, right, suddenly they could be a friend. And On the other hand, if they just said one or two negative comments to me, right, insults, immediately I wouldn't like them. So my indifference to them is just like a self-centered not caring. Actually, for sure, right, they have their own sufferings, their own stresses, their own fears, problems in their life. They want to be happy, just like I do. They don't want suffering, just like I don't. And my habit is to just ignore all of that. It's actually quite like a childish, self-centered approach to essentially ignoring the vast majority of other people because because they're not specifically, I don't see them as helping me in this moment. And then bring to mind like one example of somebody who you love or cherish or feel deep attachment to. Right? Where when you see them, like you want to be closer. Sometimes you miss the person. They're like an important part of your life. And if you bring them to mind and you honestly look at yourself, right, look at your own mind, you can see, right, my attitude to them is totally different than the other person, the first person. Immediately when I think of their face or remember them, there's some feeling of that they're important, that they do have the kind of subjective, existence. And that they're sort of like an important person in my life. That's totally because, right, of my own, actually when I look at the truth, right, I relate to them differently just because of my own ego. That they're my friend, my relative. My whatever, husband or wife, son or daughter, parent or friend. They add something to my idea of who I am. So then they're important. And sometimes they do things for me. The other person I think, oh, they're nothing. This person I think, oh, they're important. They're good. And out of a kind of self-centered perspective, I actually exaggerate in some ways, right? Their qualities, their importance. First person I don't see accurately, right? Because I don't even notice them. I don't even think about what they want and need. This person I also see inaccurately, right? As my friend, my this, my that. I'm mainly seeing them in terms of what they give to me. Maybe I care about them some, but honestly, in this, in this context, to think about it, honestly, I care about them mostly because, first of all, in the past, I see them as having done some things for me, as playing some like a role in my life. I think I'd be worse off, right, if they suffered or died or something. Also, when I see them, right, check your own experience, right? When I remember that person, immediately it feels like, oh, there they are. That's them. That's my friend. Right? As if it's some quality inherent to them, which is a complete projection of my own ego. Actually, that person, right, could easily appear as an enemy or as a stranger. First of all, they do appear that way to other people. And so there's nothing inherent to them that makes them friend. And other people look at them and find them annoying. Some others look at them and think they're total indifference. Also, over the course of my own life, my projection has changed. It's likely there were times where, depending who they are, it's likely times where I felt indifferent towards them. Other times where I disliked them, felt angry at them. But now I label them friend. If circumstance changed, right, then for sure I could label them enemy in the future. So what appears to be intrinsic to that person is actually a projection of my own mind, based on kind of egocentric concerns. Actually has almost nothing to do with them. And just like the indifference has almost nothing to do with the stranger. It's just, these are just like my mind and the way the minds of childish beings like me relate to others. Childish in the sense that, like, if you give me candy or a toy, I like you. If you take my toy away, I want to hate you. And so it's almost that level of engagement with others. It's not really any difference. Just we're bigger. Now bring to mind one example of an enemy. Somebody who, when you think of them, you immediately feel some sense of aversion or annoyance. And again, if you introspect, right, first of all, it totally appears as though that there's something intrinsic to that person that's aversive. It's bad. There's no recognition ordinarily that my mind is making that up. And actually, my mind is just making it up for egocentric reasons. They said or did a few things that I did that disagreed with me, with my sense, with my ego's sense of how I want things to be, and then I'm angry at them, don't like them, feel aversion to them, annoyance with them. There's nothing intrinsic, right? Lots of people see them and feel indifferent. Other people look at them and feel attachment, love. I myself for sure could change. Right? Happens every day. People don't like somebody, they like somebody, it changes. So we can see from our own experience, right? No, this is not some like philosophical or intellectualized inquiry. We can see for sure, though, easily from our own experience and just from a little bit of reasoning, that I go around all day, right, projecting friend, enemy, stranger, attachment, aversion, indifference. But there's nothing in the slightest from those other people's side that makes them inherently bad. They're all the same in wanting to be happy. They're all the same in not wanting to suffer. And that childish way I categorize people is just based on kind of a childish, egocentric habit. But I believe it's literally true. And based on such beliefs, right? Actually, then I do all kinds of crazy things. Right? Over time, like we were talking about, right? Because of those kind of projections, then I can end up doing crazy things, like rejoicing, feeling happy that somebody was tortured or killed. If I say it that way, of course I wouldn't do that. But if I watch the news, it might happen, actually, right? I might feel happy about that, without realizing what I'm doing. Just because I believe my own category. If I suddenly became powerful, in charge of some country, based on such categorizations, I might kill people. My view at that time would be, well, there's no choice. They're enemies of humanity, or enemies of my state, or enemies of something. I have to kill them. All kinds of family conflicts, same thing, right? They all come from this kind of view, friend, and exaggerating, right? Conflicts between different groups, right? Religious groups or racial groups, they all come from this, right? This person's friend, this is enemy. And also all my own suffering, right? All the suffering I have of, like, what's the word? Like unmet expectations, right? And disappointments in, like, relationships and romance and families, right? Marriages and so on. Like, all that comes from this, right? From these kinds of, like, ideas that we get trapped in without control. Actually, if you look, so much of what's bad in the world, right, comes from this. Like, some people are being mistreated, right? Why don't most other people stand up for them and help? Oh, because they feel indifferent towards them. So they don't intervene and say something. All the how much heartache and grief and despair, right, come from one develops a very fixed concept. This is my friend. Then the person changes. Right? Suddenly they appear like an enemy, and then one is heartbroken, one is freaked out. Right? It was just one's own projection. Right? Oh, they're supposed to be my inherently existent friend, and one time they said something nice to me. Now they're always supposed to say nice things. How can that be? They're saying something not nice. So my mind creates so much, like, confusion and suffering, grasping, expectations, attachments, anger, all because I believe in these three projections of indifference, enemy, and friend, as though they were real. You can see how much people, like, strategize to, even if, in our case, maybe it's not violence, right, physical violence, right? But how much people ruminate and worry and think and strategize, right, to get ahead of the person they think is their enemy. Right? Could be at work, or it could be in the family, whether it's over a job or inheritance or status, right, or somebody's putting you down. Right? Just because you think somebody might put you down, right? You can spend hours and hours, right, strategizing how to, like, you can't sleep at night even, right, worrying about it. How am I going to outsmart that person so that people know I'm good and they're bad? It's not that they're good and I'm bad. Or with family dynamics and so on. Right? People worry, like, spend countless hours, right, where we could be meditating on Bodhichitta. Instead, we spend our time hours and hours, like, ruminating on that, right? Bodhisattvas, like, wake up in the middle of the night, out of love, feeling unbearable, like, love and compassion for others. It's like we wake up in the middle of the night thinking, how can I outsmart my enemy so that people will like me better than them? Or so that I'll get the, whatever it is, right? The reputation, the raise, the inheritance, the popularity, the respect. Or like we worry, how can I make sure my friend is always my friend? But actually, these categories are just made up. As we label them friend because they said something nice to us. What you're really saying when you say, how can I make sure, is how can I manipulate them to always be nice to me? Because we want them to stay with our our mind's fixed category. So this equanimity, right, is to just stop believing in our own egocentric made-up story. So we can see, yes, my mind makes up things like that. But actually it's not who people are. They're just people. There are no fixed, permanent, stable enemies, strangers, or friends. They're just beings who want to be happy and don't want to suffer, who have their own mental afflictions, and are trying desperately to find some happiness. So the final step here is just see if you can feel that now, as you think of those three people, right? To feel a sense of equal respect for all three, of equal lack of expectations for all three. In one way, if you make progress in this equanimity meditation, it can feel like a big relief, actually. That you can start to drop some of these expectations, some of these like projections. You don't have to worry so much. You just let people be as they are. Giving yourself and them more peace. Come back together more interactively. See, do people have comments or questions about that equanimity meditation? I'll share just two comments myself and then see what you think. Like one is one thing I just thought of is one time when Kent Rinpoche was talking about this, he was giving one commentary on something, and he said meditation on equanimity. There's like one kind of giving is giving protection to others from harm, and he said meditation on equanimity is actually a meditation that gives protection to others from harm, from you, because as long as you don't have equanimity, eventually you do harm others, you know. He said, but if you develop equanimity, then you stop hurting other people so much. And what I thought was interesting about that is like, as I think about that one just experientially and think about myself and other people, I think it's true in not only enemies, right? We harm our enemies, of course, right? If you project enemy onto somebody, then you end up, you think all the, like even, in other words, we're not the kind of people who go out and, are doing physical violence, right? But for sure, right? In other words, the way you do your facial expression and how you talk about other people, right? Whereas if you're at work and you have somebody you don't like, right? You do harm them, actually, right? In other words, you're not walking up to them and punching them in the face. But when they see you, right, and you don't look friendly, that makes them feel uncomfortable, right? And then also, like, you see their boss, right? And they say, oh, did you see so-and-so? And you go, yeah. And they didn't, they did this, then you kind of make some little comment, right? And then they see their boss, and their boss looks at them funny, right? And maybe makes a comment negative to them, and they feel bad, right? And they think, how do you know? And why am I in trouble? And, right? Like, in other words, you do make problems, actually. In other words, by not having equanimity, now that's different than if they're doing something unethical, and you go and say, hey, listen, we got to address this. That's not what this is talking. This is talking about out of a sense of not liking the person, right? Like, in other words, you don't like them, and so you, both through your facial expression and every time you talk about them, right, you make other people think negatively of them, right? And then they walk around thinking, wow, nobody likes me, right? And you think that makes them feel better about themselves and a more nice person? No, of course not, right? And that reinforces your view of not liking them, right? Because then they start to seem paranoid and weird when they get to work, which of course they're weird because because all these people are looking at them funny because you've been making a bad reputation for them, and so on. I'm just giving you an example of how this works, right? So actually, like, if you don't have equanimity, you do harm others, actually, right? That's one thing I want to share. And then the other thing I wanted to share, actually, this was just my own reflection recently. I was thinking about how, like before, remember, like, I don't know if people remember, like, in elementary school, when you studied, it was elementary school, I'm pretty sure. We studied, like, Copernicus and Galileo. Right? So before Copernicus, right, there was this idea that everything revolved around the Earth, right? That the Earth was the center of the universe and the sun, because it looks like that, right? You look outside, you say, oh, the sun goes there, and then there, it looks like the sun's going around us, and the moon is going around. And then they said, well, everything must circle around the Earth, and the Earth is the center of the universe, right? And then when Copernicus said, no, the Earth is not, he figured out some mathematical equations, and he said, that doesn't make sense, right? It seems like the Earth is spinning on its axis, and that's why it appears like he figured out that, right? And then he said, and also, looks like the Earth is going around the sun, but then the moon is going around the Earth, and then the sun, and then he didn't figure that, so later people figured out, well, and then the sun itself is not the center of the universe, it's just one star, right? My point is this, is like, I think that we're in the realm, this is what I was thinking about recently, is that in the realm of loving kindness, in the realm of compassion, we're like the pre-Copernicans, actually, right? We're like the people who think everything revolves around me, like the sun revolves around me, the Earth around, all the stars must be revolving around me, because look, in the morning, like the Big Dipper's over here, and then slowly it's going there. I guess the Big Dipper revolves around me. Wow, like we actually, just because the Earth is spinning on its axis, right? I think we're a little bit like that, actually. Like, we're like people who think everything, like, so, and like, that this is like that, and that's like this, because everything must be around me, right? So my friends are like this, my enemies are like that, and then, like, it's like a revel. And actually, when Copernicus said, no, that's not true, nobody believed it, right? And then Galileo, like, he made the mathematical formulas for that and proved it, right? And then they thought of killing him. Right? They said, they said, maybe we should kill this guy because he's the church had said, no, it's like this, and then, he's saying something else, he's doing math about it, and they don't like math, let's burn his books and kill him, right? There's some idea. But in a way, like, we're like that. I'm just using it as a metaphor, right? That we're kind of like that, actually, right? We're like, well, everything must revolve around me. And then, like, if somebody challenges that, we want to, then we think, well, they're the enemy, actually, right? Everything does revolve around me. What are you talking about? It's obvious. It's like that, right? You can say, well, it's obvious. The sun rose over here and set over there. It must be revolving around me, right? So we feel that way about our, like, so somebody, like, frowns at us, and we feel, of course they're a bad person. They frowned at me, and this person, of course they're wonderful. They gave me a present on my birthday. They're wonderful, right? And it's like totally, what's the word? Silly in a way, right? So it's just like, we're like, what do we call it? The geocentric view. We have in the realm of love, we're the geocentrists. We think everything revolves around me. Whereas actually, right, if you think about what, I'm just giving the metaphor there, because then what does modern science say, actually, right? That there is no center to the universe, right? That actually any point in the universe could be taken, you could say, well, you could think about that as the center, conceptually, but there is no actual center to the universe, right? Every star, every planet, there is just, is there, and there's no central point. In a way, that's what we're trying to move towards, right? Experientially, in the realm of understanding love, right? Is that we're not making ourselves the center. We're also not making one other person the center. Is that in a sense everybody's the center of the universe, right? In other words, that's if you're becoming a bodhisattva, then you feel that way, right? You don't feel You lose the sense of me being the center of the universe, and you start, and it's not that you lose, because in other words, it's not like I lose the center of the earth, the sense of the earth being the center, and I think the sun is, right? In modern science, you realize, well, every place is the center of the universe, or no place is, right? My point is that if you make progress in equanimity and you're meditating on bodhicitta, then you come to a point like that, right, where you realize everybody's the center of their own universe, in a sense, right? So therefore, everybody's to be cherished equally. Does that make sense? Like the difference there? So you kind of, I'm just giving a metaphor from a historical, scientific idea, but the point is experientially, I think it should feel like that. So that, like now we know, right? If you look at the sun and then you look at another star up in the sky, well, they're the same thing, right? Or it's just this one's closer to me. Right? I think the idea in practicing compassion is that when it comes to a feeling like that like all these different people, and just because somebody seems different, right? Because they're from another, let's say, whatever, they're from another area and I haven't bumped into them before, right? That doesn't mean they're actually any different than my closest friend, right? Whereas their subjective experience is just the same, And so there comes a kind of sense that that's what equanimity would be like. Does that make sense? This sense of like, that when you see the person, you start to feel that way. It's not just intellectual, but you start to feel. Everybody has their own subjectivity and they're all the same. It's not how everything revolves around me is what matters. Right? But you start to empathize so you can, like, what's the word? You see the world from all those different perspectives. Does that make sense? It's not that you are them, right? You're not confused or something. But you can see, well, of course they have their own feeling, right? And their own sense of what they want and need. And it's not any different than my mom's or my dad's or my best friend's. So does that make sense about equanimity? I just want to I think it's a really important one.
It seems that even when you look at a neutral person, that neutral feeling, it seems to me that's still like a negative feeling. So you have like, friend, enemy, and neutral. It seems like the neutral still has like a negative tone to it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it is. Yeah, that neutral is considered a negative in a way because it's like because you don't care in a way. Like that neutral is like is almost an indifference. That's why I use the word indifference. Like you're indifferent to them, which is like I sometimes think of that was why I gave that example earlier. Like, in other words, if you have equanimity, it's like you cherish everyone equally in a way, right? Whereas if you have indifference, you don't cherish them at all. Actually, and so one way of viewing the difference is this: is like if you have in the indifference one, then if somebody harmed that person, you actually don't care, right? Whereas if you have equanimity, then you care about everybody. In other words, you would care if anybody gets harmed. That makes sense. That's one way of viewing the difference.
I think you would still care though. Like if you see a stranger and something happens to them, then your feeling changes at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say it.
Yeah,
I would.
That's true. Yeah, sometimes that's true. But I guess if you think about the person you're indifferent towards, right, or the strange, like at least when I think about that, like, isn't it like you almost don't notice them? Is that true? Like you almost don't notice anything about them. You don't really even look at them carefully, right, to see like what's their facial expression.
Right.
It's like that's why I sometimes think of that. Like if you think of when you go into the gas station, right? If you have to walk in to get a bottled water. Right? Now, some people are friendly, you smile, you talk. But I'm talking about if you're in a hurry. Let's say you're in a hurry and you go to the gas station, right? So you're filling up your tank, and then you realize, oh no, I gotta go use the bathroom or something, or whatever. And you pass by the person behind the counter, and you don't even know. Like afterwards, if somebody said, well, what they look like, you'd go, you wouldn't even remember. Like you might remember their gender, right? Mm-hmm. That's about it. Or you might, that's maybe that's all, right? Mm-hmm. It's that kind of feeling where they're almost like it's almost like viewing like. You almost barely are viewing the person as a human being in a way. I mean, not that you're not thinking they're not human, but you're not having any human feeling for them, right? And then you think of the Dalai. For me, I contrasted them when I see the Dalai Lama go around, right? Like I remember just as a small moment, but I remember one time when the Dalai Lama was in Madison, Wisconsin. One time, I was there. I remember like it struck me like this because if I'm walking down the street and I see a police officer there, right? Actually, I don't do anything criminal, and yet I don't even. My habit is not even to look them in the eye. I just sort of keep going. I don't even look at them. Usually. I don't want to notice them particularly. I don't want any problems. And then I remember seeing the Dalai Lama, right, and there were police officers there. Now remember, he's a Tibetan, actually, right? Like, whereas like, so he's a refugee, right? And technically, right, he's a refugee technically, right? And he's not a citizen. So I mean, he's not. I mean, in theory, I should be more comfortable than he should be. Right? He's in a foreign country, and I remember noticing that immediately he walked up to each police officer and was like chatted with them, like even touched them physically, which people don't usually do to police officers. Like he wouldn't treat them with indifference, right? He treated them, each one as a human being. I remember thinking that's really unusual, and then I watched at the end, like, and they look. I remember I was volunteering that time, and I remember looking. At first, the cops were kind of like, "Oh, I got stuck with this job," like some foreign guys. It was like 1980s, right? So they're like, some foreign guys here. I'm stuck standing out here in the heat. It's when whatever. Like this is not what a crappy assignment it looked like. It looked like that was their. And then the Dalai Lama, it did like every time he came in though, he would chat with them, and then by the end I was there, and a few of the police officers, like he came over and he was saying goodbye to them. And he was like shaking their hand and a couple of police officers, I saw them starting to like, they were trying to like not tear up. You could see like they were like, or something like that, because they don't want to. And my point is, I was like, wow, like because nobody treats them like, whereas he was treating them just with kindness. That's all, like. But there was no projection of like, oh, you're this and I'm that, or it was just like, he was actually nobody's affectionate to police officers, right? But he was, he wasn't like hugging them or something, but he was being very friendly. Let's put it that way. And my point is like that to me, that was like a good example to me of how I'm not equanimity, right? Like, like I walk by and I don't think like right now, wow, what's their experience like? Do they wish they weren't here? What's their, what I mean? Like, so it's like that kind of equanimity, I think, is a good example of that. Like, I mean, that's also cherishing of the other. Does that make sense? To me, that's part of the difference. Like, there wasn't a sense of like not noticing them as an individual person.
So even even if you have if we still have that feeling of neutrality, that's still, it's like a negative. That's like negative karma. We're still, right?
That's an interesting question. Is it negative karma versus? It's definitely not conducive to the bodhisattva's way of life, right? It's not a bodhisattva or is it an obstacle to bodhicitta? I don't know if it's an actual
It's
negative
not love.
karma. Yeah, it's not love, right?
It's not love.
I'm not sure if it might be a neutral karma.
Because
though.
of his indifference.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a negative karma or a neutral karma. What do you think?
That's what I was asking. Like to me, it still feels like it has a negative aspect to it. Even if you don't care, but then if something bad happens to them, then you kind of care. But your original feeling is that you don't care.
Yeah, I don't know. I think from it's interesting because I think from in one way it seems very negative, right? Like what Lama Zopa was saying in the beginning of that motivation. From that point of view, it seems very negative because it's sort of like from a Mahayana point of view, right? You would say, well, that's your mother, actually, right? From a past life, and you're just walking by her like you don't care. From that point of view, like from Lama Zopa's point of view, you would say, and the Mahayana point of view, you would say, well, that seems almost, he said, shameful, right?
Right.
I guess though, from the teachings on karma, from that point of view, so from one point of view, it seems shameful, so it seems quite bad. But from the point of view of the teachings on karma themselves, right? Then I think it might be like not a negative karma that can lead to rebirth in lower realms, but more of a neutral karma that just leads to more samsara. But I don't think it's like a negative karma in the sense that it can cause rebirth in the lower realm. Like the attitude of indifference to a stranger, I don't think is like it's done with ignorance, right? So it's causing more samsara. But I don't think it's a negative karma in the sense of like a rebirth in the lower realms kind of karma.
I think it's tricky though, because it could change in like that, because if you got a stranger, and you walk by them, and something happens to them, and your initial reaction is like, you want to laugh or something like that, or you're like, oh, like, or you might say like, oh my gosh, look, what happened, but your feeling is kind of like, it's not love. It's you worry and you're like, oh, better them than me, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And then you move on. Then that just turned that neutral karma into negative karma.
Yeah.
So it became a negative really quick.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I agree with that. That makes sense.
Or it could have been positive if it's easy,
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
but I still see it like there's a negative thing to it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, for sure, from a Mahayana point of view, I think it's reasonable to say that, right? It's a shameful attitude, to a certain way. That's what they call. That's what Amazola called it. I think. I think that was the word he used, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
They used some word like that.
And it's still self-cherishing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It's still the self looking at that outside person and
Yeah, it's completely a self-cherishing way of viewing the whole world, right? Well, it's up to people, like, so it's like 12:30 or so. People want to meditate for another little while and then take a lunch break, or you want to take a lunch break now and then come back? What's people's, I know obviously we'll take a break, but what's people's preference? Do you want to stop now or do a half hour and then stop? Half hour and then stop? Okay. So if we keep going, right, the next, the way we were doing it, where you combine the two methods of bodhicitta, then the next one is those steps of viewing all beings as your mother, recollecting the kindness of the mother, and then wishing to repay that kindness, which gives rise to love, right? And actually, if you notice, right, in this method, actually, so you do those to give rise to love, and then you sort of go back and you do the false of self-cherishing, the advantage of cherishing others. And what it does is it gives rise to even more powerful love, because you have two methods of giving rise to love, so you're making your love stronger and stronger. And it's love that gives rise to compassion and bodhicitta, so it makes it, the bodhicitta, easier and stronger to give rise to. That's why we sometimes combine those methods. Also remember, like when we're doing the kindness of mother beings, right, that's just one way of recollecting the kindness. The really important thing psychologically is you have to, if you want to give rise to bodhicitta, you have to view others, in other words, you have to contemplate the kindness of others, right? But as the teachings say, you can think of the kindness of others in past lives, that's the mother beings one. You can think of the kindness of others in general way in the past. You can think of the kindness of others in your present life, in general, like how your happiness is dependent on others. You can think of your interdependence with others, and you can think of the kindness of others in the future. So it's very extensive how you can think about others as kind. Right? But remember those verses earlier that we were doing? Where we said the verses from the 8 verses of mind training. Determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings, who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, I shall hold them dear at all times, right? So, the idea here, right, is that, that verse is very meaningful, right? But then the question can arise, well, how do I view others as more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, right? In other words, most of us, right, if you're going around, like, if somebody says, let me introduce you to somebody you never met before, right? This is Fidel. Right? It's like, all right, hi, like that, right? And then if I said to you, I have a winning lottery ticket, do you want it? It's worth $300 million. Which would you be more excited about?
Fidel.
So you get the idea.
Without hesitation.
So you get the idea, though, right? Like, in other words, that's the idea. More precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel means more precious than a winning lottery ticket worth $300 million. Right? Like,
but think of all the people you could help with that $300 million.
To include yourself.
You could help thousands of Fidels.
Yeah, exactly.
and so, it's funny. Actually, it's interesting though, right? Actually, this is true. I'll just share a scientific perspective for a minute on this. People may have read this, but actually it's true, actually, when they do research on what makes people happy, right? Like, psychologists now are doing a lot of research on that. They didn't used to, but they became interested. They used to only be interested in what makes people miserable. Then they decided, because nobody wanted to pay money for what makes people happy. If you could figure out what makes somebody miserable, they'll pay you money to cure it, right? Like depression or something. And therefore you get money out of it, whereas they didn't want to study what makes people happy because nobody was going to give them any money then finally, I guess some NIH started to give money, and then they said, okay, we'll study that. Anyway, my point is this, when they study what makes people happy, right? So one of the earliest studies that's been repeated many times was they studied lottery winners, right? And what they found, actually they found people who won, so they actually went and did studies on people who won the lottery, right? And what they found actually was that when people won the lottery, that if they were at a certain level of happiness, of course, for a very brief time after they won the lottery, their happiness increased, right? They were very excited, and they reported feeling much more happy. But that when they did studies, there have been different versions, but usually either what the research showed is either their happiness level goes back to what it was or slightly lower, actually, because they now have more stress, right? Because then oftentimes actually part of it is more stressful to manage their money, but the other reason is that sometimes then it creates, what's the word, a distance for them from other people, because suddenly people want money from them, and then they like feel more distant. Like, so in other words, some of their friends or things like that, they actually became more distant from because of like, well, they're suddenly in a different socioeconomic class, or their friends wanted something from them, and so then if it created less closeness to others, then they actually became less happy after winning the lottery. And on the other hand, though, actually, just in terms of what we're talking about, this is scientific a little bit, but when people develop a sense of gratitude to others, an appreciation of others, and intimacy or affection with others, that's the most effective way to become happier, actually, right? And there is people who have more gratitude, more appreciation, more affection in their lives are happier. And if they, and they did studies like it, just if somebody, they did a study like, compare this. So if you won millions of dollars, right, over time you became the same happy or less happy than you were before. On the other hand, when they did a study, this is so silly in a way, where people just had to keep a journal and write down 3 things they were grateful for every day. And after a year, those people were significantly happier than they were before. That's so cheap, though, right? I mean, it doesn't cost anything to write down 3 things and also it shows how little are people thinking. If it was just to write down 3, how little were they thinking about what they're grateful for before that? Then, right? Like, whereas if that made them happier, it means they weren't thinking at all about what made them what they were grateful for, right? Otherwise, writing down 3 things wouldn't have much. If you were thinking what you were grateful for 20 or 30 times every hour, then writing it down 3 times would just be like nothing, right? It means that like they were hardly ever thinking of what they were grateful for, so 3 times a day seemed like a lot for them. So the point is actually, I just want to mention, this is a side note, but actually it's in line with what we're talking about, is so actually that verse is true in a certain way. Like, in other words, in other words, and actually even in reference to your point, which I agree with you in one way, but actually, having spent time with some people, like even Buddhist people who are very wealthy, actually, usually, my experience, and even talking to it, is actually it looks very stressful, right? Because like if you let's say you suddenly had $300 million, right? Then can you imagine all of a sudden people you don't really know would be saying, "Can I have a meeting with you?" When do you have time to meet? And that they're coming, and again, like they're very sincere, right? But like, and then like it's all these things and you don't know who they are really, and they're saying, oh, I have this project and it's extremely important. And the first 2 times that might be really interesting, right? But imagine if everywhere you went, you go see the Dalai Lama and 25 people come up to you and say, "Can I have a meeting with you?" Right? You go see Lama Zopa, and like every project, right? Because Lama Zopa has so many projects, then they're all saying, "Oh, I heard Rebecca is a really good person to talk to. She might be willing to help." And so then all these people you don't know are coming up and saying, "Rebecca, can I meet with you? I have a really interesting thing. I would like to talk to you." Actually, like, it starts to be like, well, I'm here on retreat. I want to see, like I came to hear Lama Zopa, or I came to hear the Dalai Lama. I just want to meditate, But now like 25 different people, and there's only like 4 meals, right? But I have 25 people who want to talk to me. How do I even say no to them all? Actually, it looks like, again, maybe it's good it is good in the sense of helping others, but unless you're very like advanced, actually for yourself, it actually can ruin your whole like practice. And even like you say, so you call up a retreat center, you say, "I just want to come and get away. It's been so stressful. All these people are asking me for help, so I'm going to call up a retreat center. I want to go there." Then you get to the retreat center, and you get there, and like if you got there now, they would say, "Hi, Rebecca, nice to see you. Here's your cabin." But if you had the $300 million, and they'd say, "Rebecca, nice to see you, but can you say that we're trying to build 17 new cabins? Can we just chat with you about that project? I want to show you. Let me show you the diagrams." Now you have no interest in diagrams. You're not like that may not be your thing, right? But suddenly you're having to look at like what's the word, architectural plans and this and that, or if it's a leprosy clinic, or if it's a this, and my point is, like if you're a bodhisattva already, right? Then it might be wonderful to do that. You'd be like, "Oh, great, they're interrupting my meditation to help because they want help." But for like a beginner, actually, it could actually, for others it might be useful, but for you it might actually ruin your practice. It might be like a total nightmare. possible. Actually, it's probably likely if it were you. Right? Because you're a very sincere person, you'd want to help, and then all these people would be like, "Oh, wow!" And they'd even be coming from out of town. They'd be coming in, right? Oh, where's the nearest hotel to your house? We're staying there. He said, "I don't know. I don't know where the nearest hotel is." So it might be unpleasant for you actually. If you had $300 million, and it might be quite unpleasant, actually.
It could even make you go away from Buddhism. To have that much money.
Yeah, wherever you go, then it's going to be the same. Right? Because then you go to somewhere else, and people say, $300 million, and they're going to say, "Oh, you're not just in Buddhism anymore. Good." But I'm starting another kind of project, and let me tell you about it, Gabe.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're not giving that money away to Buddhists, because I have another project that's much more better than that, and I think you would really like it. Wherever you go, people are going to want it.
Yeah.
So the point is actually this is true though, and it just in that simple level, right? In other words, like the wish fulfilling jewel, right? That's our cultural equivalent of that. $300 million is like a wish fulfilling, right? It actually becomes a big nightmare in that way. But on the other hand, right? Actually, just on a simple level, right? Actually, when they do, think about it. This is what scientists are saying, right? So you compare having $300 million to having one sincere friend, right? Actually, in terms of your happiness in life, the one sincere friend is definitely going to make you happier. Now it's different if you were. Actually, when scientists they say when they really study it, they say the only exception to that is if you're in dire straits. In other words, if you're in danger of starvation or something, then of course a little bit. Then it's not $300 million though; it's enough money to buy food and a place to live is important. But actually, scientists show beyond that it's not that helpful. In other words, when they did studies on this, it wasn't that helpful. Right, and so in other words, so how do you get this view though that others are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel? Right? So it has to be this, right? It has to be like contemplating the preciousness of others, right? And what does precious mean in a way? So it means their inherent value in a way, but also their kindness, right? That's what they're talking about here. Like that's what there is. So when he says, "I will view others," whereas if you just walk around saying, "Okay, I'm trying to view others as a precious jewel. I'm trying to view others as a precious jewel," that's good, but it doesn't necessarily change your feeling that much, right? So a more effective way, according to the Buddhist psychology, is to view others. In other words, is to meditate on others as kind, right? Meditate on the kindness of others. So you develop an emotional feeling. Now, I've said this before that in the class when we covered this, is that sometimes for Westerners it's difficult to do this mother beings one. Right? Sometimes it's easier to do the one of for example, all my food comes from others. That's easier, right? Because we can see that more obviously. But that's just because we don't, actually that's really because for cultural reasons and also because many of us don't have that much belief in reincarnation. So then it's hard to really meditate on this if you don't have that, right? So then it's easier to say, well, if I ate some rice, of course that depends on the kindness of others, which it does, right? In other words, obviously. That you can't, it's totally obvious, right? In other words, somebody grew it, somebody drove it here, somebody sold it, somebody cleaned it, somebody packaged it, in other words, that's all obvious. To our, that's easier to see. But, on the other hand, there's a benefit to the kindness of other beings, which is it's more visceral if you can get it. Whereas it's harder for Westerners, I think, to do this meditation. But if you can do it, it's also, more emotionally, it has a lot of emotional impact, let's put it that way. So anyway, let's just meditate for a few minutes. So you said we'd do the half hour, so let's do that. So I'm going to emphasize a particular part. So the first part of that would be, viewing all beings as one's mother. I'm not going to emphasize that part, but that requires just what the Rinpoche, Lama Zomerje was talking about in the reading, which is if you remember, you have beginningless lives, right? So I've had beginningless lives. That's infinite number. In each of an infinite number, I've had a mother, right? Each time. So that's an infinite number of mothers. Right? So I've an infinite number of times I've received the kindness from an infinite number of sentient beings. Infinite. Right? But so then I want to emphasize the second point, which is recollecting the kindness of the mother. Right? So let's do that in a particular way today, which is like to imagine, right, to think about, like when you were a baby, right, or a toddler. Like toddlers and babies sometimes feel what's the word? Not just scared, but almost like terrified. Right? In other words, they don't yet have a sense of the world. Right? And to think of a mother, right, when you're very young like that, lifting you up, right, and holding you close, and just using that tone of voice that mothers use. The kind of sweet tone of voice that they use with babies. And to try to get the feeling, right, of how, like for you at that time, like that was the most reassuring thing in the universe. Just the feeling of your mother holding you, the tone of her voice, and then to imagine, right, that an infinite number of times, over an infinite number, I mean, just in one life, right, there are thousands of times a child gets scared, and their parents lift them up and reassure them. But then that happened in an infinite number of lifetimes to me. And infinite is like, that means like all the grains of sand on this planet. Right? And then for sure, right, there are as many stars as there are grains of sand on this planet. Right? So imagine as many planets as there are, around those stars there are planets. Right? So imagine as many planets as there are grains of sand on this planet. And then imagine all the grains of sand on all those countless planets. It's inconceivable, right? You can't even imagine how many grains of sand there are just on the eastern seaboard of the United States coast, right? We're talking about the whole planet, and then on that many planets. Then that's not infinite. Infinite's infinitely more than that. So it's totally inconceivable, infinity. And that many times, that many countless, inconceivable times, right? Mothers lifted you up and held you close. They spoke sweet words like that. And try to feel that sense of you being the recipient of that. Try to imagine that in past lives, every other person in this room, right, at some time or other, for sure was your mother. And when you were scared, they lifted you up and held you like that. And helped you feel safe. Same thing, like an infinite number of times when you were sick, as a baby or a toddler. Just in one life it happened so many times, and there were infinite lives, right? That like, so you think of the kindness, right? A mother who worries about you, who gives you medicine, who dabs your forehead with a washcloth. Who, like, if you're sick and vomiting as a baby, right, then the mother, like, lets you vomit on her, right, rather than leave you alone. when you were pooping a lot, right? She over and over again cleaned that gently. And every person in this room in past lives was your mother, gave you that kind of kindness. The infinite beings gave you that kind of kindness. Infinitely. And so you're trying to cultivate an actual feeling of gratitude, right? But it's like an inconceivable kind of gratitude. For you to have been the recipient of so much love. Like inconceivable oceans of love. If you try to think of all the milk, right, that those mothers fed you from their body, because it's infinite, right? Then even all the oceans on this earth couldn't contain it. You think of like a mother holding her baby and singing it to sleep. Wanting the baby to have a restful sleep. If you think of all the times, right, that all your infinite mothers like held you and sang to you, many times in one life, but then over infinite, inconceivable lifetimes, right? Like all those planets with all those grains of sand, just inconceivable number. And then the sound of that sweet, soft, quiet singing, of lullaby, even the universe couldn't contain it. Right? Even though each time it was just a soft, gentle lullaby. But it's a lullaby times infinity. And to think every stranger you've ever met or ever ignored held you and sang to you like that. Where in that moment, right, you were their most intimate in the whole universe, and you were and vice versa. Right? You were theirs, and they were yours. Your closest person. Because if you think of that moment, right, of being held, or the mother gently singing a lullaby, right? The experience is like it's only those two in the entire universe. It's like a complete absorption of affection, in affection. Like each of their minds is completely absorbed in this kind of peaceful, affectionate interaction. You've had that with everyone, that kind of intimacy, that kind of affectionate closeness. Right? Where it's hard to almost feel, right, for the baby and the mother, where one begins and the other ends in that kind of moment, right? Like if you think of the mother sitting in a rocking chair or an easy chair, rocking the baby a bit and humming, where they're both kind of tired, near to drifting off to sleep. You've had that with every sentient being. Such a sense of affection, of warmth, of closeness, of intimacy. So here we're trying to cultivate, like, on the one hand, of course, a sense of gratitude for their kindness, but also that recollection or that recognition of closeness, of warmth, of intimacy, of affection. Of like, that's where you could use the word extreme cherishing. There's an extreme cherishing of each other. And I've had that kind of intimacy or affection or closeness with everyone in this room, with everyone in this town, with everyone in this state, in this country, on this planet, everyone everywhere. So through that feeling, right, it's like a feeling of gratitude, of appreciation, of closeness, of affection, of cherishing. Then it really feels like, yes, they're more precious than $1 billion. Of course, right? But the feeling is they're so beautiful, so marvelous, so wonderful, right? That's the feeling, like the feeling that the mother has towards the baby, the feeling the baby has towards the mother. The feeling is almost like a feeling of what? Of wonder, almost of awe. Like this other is the entire universe. And you've had that feeling, infinite. In that way, if you imagine like the love and the care and the feeling of like adoration you've received, infinite times is infinite babies and toddlers. Again, like the entire universe couldn't contain that. All the space and the galaxies, right? The space between the galaxies and inside the galaxies couldn't contain that much love or affection. Because it's been infinite, right? Over infinite lifetimes. You've been infinitely cherished, infinitely adored. And when you acted difficult, right, like toddlers do, again, as teenagers or different ages, right? Like, and parents, like, did their best to be kind and patient in reaction to that. But they did that for you not just once, right, but over and over in each lifetime, and then in an infinite number of lifetimes. So people have been infinitely patient with you. Right? So imagine that each being, right, like each one has been infinitely patient, and then there are an infinite number of beings who have been patient. And if you really contemplate that, right, all the childish things that children, teenagers do, and then that's happened an infinite number of times with each being, and then with an infinite number of beings. Right? So everybody's been so patient and tolerant, trying their best. then it's almost like heartbreaking. You feel such like a feeling of gratitude or appreciation or fortune. Right? That you've been the recipient of so much patience, kindness, care. So then, like, you can think, like, I now, this adult me, right, who's temporarily existing here on this planet. In the past, I was infinitely those babies, infinitely those toddlers, who experienced such infinite patience, kindness, love, affection, care, and so on, from each being infinitely, and then from infinite beings. So the conclusion then of that, right, is a feeling of gratitude, of appreciation, of warmth or closeness to others, and a wishing to kind of repay the kindness. How wonderful it would be, right? If I could repay that infinite kindness by leading all those former mothers to Buddhahood. Really, there's nothing better in the universe than that. Right? Having received infinite love from others, to repay that infinite love with freedom and enlightenment for all those others. As vast as the vastness of space. With a love and gratitude and appreciation and affection as vast as the vastness of space. A kind of limitless affection, limitless gratitude, limitless kindness. And a limitless wish to repay kindness. We can kind of stop that meditation there. Just before we stop for the break, any questions about that? At least you get the feeling of how you know, like, there's of what the feeling's supposed, what you're experimenting with, you know, because again, meditation's like experimenting with your own mind, right? It's not like a computer program or something. You just write it and press run or something. It's like experimenting to see what works for me to give a feeling, and how can I expand on that feeling so that it becomes visceral and experiential. Knowing that any gratitude you give rise to, right, any affection or closeness or warmth, is healthy, right? Like, there's from any measure, right? Those are good feelings to have. They're healthy for you. And so it's like working with your own mind to see, well, how can I enhance those? And if they're unfamiliar feelings, then that's okay. Then it just takes more practice. Like, but the mind can increase anything, remember? Like, in other words, you can increase negative or positive states of mind if you want. So, in other words, definitely it's possible to increase our sense of love or gratitude. So we just have to keep trying and sort of experimenting with different ways of thinking and viewing things, to sort of to do that. And again, like I've said this before, but you know, we we know that's possible, right? Because if you think of the negative ones, right, definitely, like, if you want some, like, actually in our culture there's so much emphasis on how to increase attachment, right? There's like if you think of advertising, right, like there's a whole industry, right, where people, there are more than one, but there are huge industries, right, where they think, well, how can we get people to want this more, right? And so then, like, you know, there's so many methods, right? Well, you know, like, so you want people to want, what, like a hat? So what do you do? Like, do you tie that hat to piles of money? Do you tie it to a naked woman? Do you tie it to, what do you do to make people want to buy the hat, right? You know, and they do all different things, right? Like, you know, put the hat in space, or whatever, you know, what do you need to do to make people want that hat, right? And they try all different things until finally people say, oh, I gotta buy that hat. It's the coolest hat in the world, right? So if we can do it in a negative way, then for sure we can do it in a positive way, but it takes effort, right? You have to see what works for your mind. So anyway, I'm just making the point. So you can cultivate negative or positive states, but it takes time and a little bit of creativity to figure out what works for your mind to actually bring that about and then increase it. Okay, so positive. Which actually leads very naturally into our contemplation. So the next contemplation, which goes right from that, is on how the equalizing of self and others. Right? So how just, in this case, it's ordinarily, right, I cherish myself. But actually it's this kind of visceral recognition that we're aiming for. That every sentient being cherishes themselves in just the same way. It wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer. And one way of viewing that is that we're all like a sick, you know, person with an illness, right, in need of medicine. Right? Because we're all afflicted by the afflictive emotions. So there's no difference between us in that sense. So whether you see a sentient being that's an ant, or president, a cockroach, or a CEO, whether somebody's male or female, whether they're poor or rich, they're an animal, a human being. Actually, we're all the same, and we're all the same in wanting happiness, but also we're all the same in being stuck with causes of suffering, right? The afflictive emotions. Also, we all want more happiness, right? Nobody's ever satisfied. Or somebody's satisfied, it's just for a moment, a brief time. And then they want more of something. Let's actually just try to think for a moment, right, about the numberless others, infinite number of others, who don't have all the happiness they want, who are stuck with suffering, who in their hearts they long for happiness and long to be free from suffering. And try, like I was using that metaphor before, like try to step out of your own perspective. Like not imagining that everything revolves around your little earth, right? But to imagine a universe without center, where everyone has their own equally valid, equally important subjectivity. Everybody wants happiness. Everybody's totally like afflicted. They're longing. It's not just some intellectual thing, right? Most of them are completely deprived of happiness. Most of them are much worse off than most other sentient beings. Ordinarily, you feel I'm over here, and those people are over there. But actually, here is only here relative to there. There is only there relative to here. So the categories self and other are just relative. Labels. So this kind of rigid sense I usually have of cherishing my happiness more than others is based on a relative, just a conceptual idea. So now we're kind of moving out of our ordinary concept of an inherently separate me. To empathize with the infinite others. So there's no longer, right, this sense of, a solid me over here and solid others for everyone else. But instead there's a kind of recognition of an infinite number of beings, right, who are wanting happiness, who are suffering, who are bereft of what they want, who are longing for something more. And so that small sense of me, it becomes almost kind of lost in that infinite empathy with infinite number of beings. It becomes clear, right, that just the purpose of life is so clear and simple, right? It's to bring the greatest possible happiness to the most beings possible. Ultimately to all beings. It's to decrease the suffering of as many beings as possible. Ultimately all beings. The most reasonable purpose in life has to be that. So it's clear then, right, that the reasonable thing, the healthy thing, is not to cherish myself more than others. Right? Not to follow a immature belief that I'm somehow inherently more important than others. Or that some other people are more important than other people. But instead in the heart, right, to cherish all beings. sometimes Lama Zopa Rinpoche, when he teaches this meditation, he points out that a good way to conclude it is to actually resolve, right, that due to this recognition, right, then when this recognition of equalizing self with others, then one can kind of resolve that whenever I have a decision to make in my life, right, each day when I have like small decisions or big decisions to make, that just based on this kind of simple recognition, this simple kind of correct reasoning and empathy, that the basis for all my decisions will be like this. That whatever brings the happiness to the most beings, whatever decreases the suffering of the largest number of beings, that's what I should do. So whenever I have a doubt about how to decide something in my life, what to do next, whether it's what to do, today, or what to do for a career, what to do, with like a large portion of my life or just a few minutes, that the best way to decide, right, the most reasonable, most wise way to decide is to think what's of greatest benefit to the greatest number of sentient beings. Then whatever it is, then with confidence you do that. If you see you're capable of that action, and that action is among your choices in your daily life, right, with your abilities, your aptitudes, your interests, and so on. And within those, every time you have a decision, right, that's the most wise basis for deciding. What will bring the most happiness to the largest number? What will decrease the suffering most significantly to the largest number? Then it's like totally clear, and you do your best to do that. So let's conclude this meditation with that kind of resolution in our own minds. I'll try my best to live that way. So let's come together. Meditate more in a minute, but actually, what do people think about that idea of that resolution? Does that seem like a reasonable basis for decision? Actually, one other thing Lama Zopa says, actually, I'll just mention, I like this, is he says, so base your decision on that. And then two things. One is like, then feel really joyful. Like whether you succeed or fail at whatever you set out to do, like he points out, to feel really joyful, that like you're doing you're using your life the best way. That's all anybody can do, right? So like, whereas if you think, well, okay, I'm going to try this activity or this endeavor or this project or this action right now, that you made your decision with the most wisdom a human being can do, and whereas nobody can, you can't ask of yourself more than that, right? Whereas depending on what you're capable, or as you accurately assess, well, this seems like, given who I am and what my life situation is, among the choices I have for today, this seems like the most, what will benefit the most people, right? Lama Zopa says, then like have great joy and really enjoy it. He points out that should be the basis for really, like to feel a sense of joy and enthusiasm and even like pleasure and enjoyment in your life because you're living the best life. Right? And then also, I like, one thing I really like also is something the Dalai Lama often says about himself, that he actually says, then if you succeed, the Dalai Lama, because actually, I think it's interesting, right? The Dalai Lama is like, in some ways, amazing, right? I mean, like, in one way, like, somebody said that, the Dalai Lama is regarded so positively, right? But also, actually, if you think about it, there is many, except for in China, many of the Dalai Lamas viewed very positively. But actually, the Dalai Lama, like sometimes people will say, well, to the Dalai Lama in interviews, right? They'll say, well, Your Holiness, like you actually failed, right? Like in other words, you set out to free the Tibetan people through this particular approach. It didn't work. It was 1959. It's been a long time, and and I, what Dalai Lama always says is the same thing about himself. He says the same thing Lama Zopa is saying to encourage you, which is like, if you set out with with the intention as pure as you can, and with as much wisdom as you can, that then like, there's no point having regrets, right? Like in other words, whether you succeed or fail in a particular endeavor, if you do your absolute best, you have to be satisfied with that, right? Like, I think sometimes it's easy to get caught. Say it this way: it's easy to get caught up in like external success, like, or does my action, does it lead to some kind of particular external thing that I want it to lead to? But actually, nobody can control that. That's the point, right? Like, in other words, we can't always have that, right? If you say, oh, I'm always going to succeed externally, well, actually, you're going to die, like, you're not going to succeed externally. You're going to get sick and so on. Like, all kinds of things will happen, right? And external forces can impede, but nobody can stop you, right, from making a decision to do the most compassionate thing you can, and doing your best to do it, right? And so, like, it's interesting that what they're saying is that's a healthy basis for not having regrets in your life, right? Because we say, well, each time I had a major decision, I did my best to live with compassion, and with some wisdom of understanding what I can offer and what I can't, and what I'm capable of. In other words, that's the basis for, like, what's the word? A sense of satisfaction, maybe you call it, right? Or contentment in your life. Anyway, so I just wanted to represent that as an interesting, in terms of bodhicitta and like in a day-to-day way. That's, I think, an interesting concept. Do you have a thought on it?
No, it's just that don't attach to outcome once it is.
Yeah.
And that's good, because you try to do that and it's sitting upright. I like this.
Yeah, if you look at the actions, I'll say that too, because a lot of times we don't have a culture that supports that, I don't think. But if you look at like the literature even, if you look at the lives of people like Lama Zopa and Dalai Lama, you see it, but also if you look at, like with Lama Zopa and the Maitreya project, right? Like that project to build the largest statue, like of Maitreya, right? Like, it hasn't been built yet, right? Like, there was a hope that it would have been built by now. It's not built, right? But, like, so you say it, like, whereas I think it doesn't really matter in other words, it's done, right? In other words, Lama Zopa, what was the purpose of it? It was love, right? So the Maitreya symbolizes love, right? It was like, it was out of devotion to his teacher, right? And out of love for all sentient beings, right? And a symbol of love in the world. And, in a sense, like, can you control what the Indian government does and what some official does in some particular province? No, like, but you can set out to do something out of love, and whatever happens from that will be good, even if the external result is not what you intended initially. Like, the fact that you were doing something out of love helps the people who were involved in that, right? And like, the Tibet's not yet free, right? I believe it will be, but it's not yet, right? But, what's that we say it? But the example of a non-violent approach to that has benefited a lot of people in the world regardless. So my point is, like, see what I'm getting at? Like, if you're doing it in the right way, whether you have a particular, and the same thing, like, I often think this with bodhisattvas, that was what I mentioned, with bodhisattvas, when you read, like, sutras, telling the stories or old stories about bodhisattvas, like, they never say, well, I'm going to go teach, and everybody has to follow my teaching and be perfect, right? Like, what they say is, I'm gonna try to benefit others with as strong a compassion as I can, and if they mess up, then they're even more precious jewels, right? Like, in other words, like those verses we were reading, right? That as I'm trying to help them, if they hurt me in return, then that's really, like, that's the best. That's a really good outcome. If they get better and they improve and they become enlightened, that's a good outcome. If they become angry and, become upset that I was trying to help them, that's also a good outcome, right? There's not an attachment that everything should go according to a plan and everybody else should respond in a certain way, right? It's just I'll do my best, right? In each moment. And I think we need that. I'm just raising because I find for myself I need that, right? Like, because I can't control the results, right? Like, all kinds of things happen in the world, and even in our own lives. But if we do our best, that's. Anyway, you get the idea there. I just think isn't that a useful concept? Like, because otherwise it becomes like, that story, do people know that story? It's in the book I edited about prayer wheels. Actually, since we were meditating on Avalokiteshvara, people know that story about Avalokiteshvara. Like, so he's the Buddha of compassion, right? But there's a story that when he was a bodhisattva, right, that he, he made the bodhisattva vow, and he was like working for the benefit of all sentient beings, right? He was like working, I forget how long, thousands of years or something like that, like eon or something, like with great effort. And then they say he stopped and looked around, like he had started looking at the universe. Right? I think I'm telling you a story because I think it relates to we can experience. I don't think this is like, what's the word? I don't think it's different from our own experience on a symbolic level. We can experience ourselves. So he looked at the world and he thought, okay, I'm going to help others. And then he worked and worked and worked to help others. And then he paused for a moment to look around, and he saw just as much suffering. And like he had helped others a lot, yet he looked around and he saw just as much suffering in the world as there was before. He looked and he saw incredible suffering still. Right? And they say that he had said, if I ever stop helping others, may my head explode, my body break into 1,000 bits or something. And then he looked around and he thought he felt hopeless for a moment, and his head exploded and his body blew into 1,000. So he kind of like went, just like exploded with. I think that is a good metaphor for how we can feel at times. I mean, like it can feel like that at times. So they say he exploded, but then they say actually that Amitabha Buddha, who was his guru, kind of came down and took that's where 1,000-armed Shinreza came from. Actually, 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvaras. They said he healed him, right? And he said, your head burst into 11 pieces, so now you're gonna have 11 heads, and your body burst into 1,000 pieces. Now you're gonna have 1,000 arms. He said, and therefore you're more able to, and each hand of 1,000 hands has an eye in it, right? So it symbolizes that what's how to say it? Like his wisdom sees, right, and at the same time he helps, right? His wisdom sees reality, and at the same time he can help 1,000 times more powerfully than he could before. So I think again that symbolizes something, right? Whereas Amitabha was teaching him, I think, something related to what we're talking about, which is like not to be attached to one's own agenda, but to work with even greater compassion, right, and even greater wisdom. So anyway, I think there's like those stories have some kind of meaning for one's life. I always like this story. I think it can sometimes feel that way, right? If you're trying to help somebody, I think everybody here has done that, like because you guys are compassionate people. So that you try to help somebody, and then you see like, then sometimes it looks like, wow, it's still so much suffering there. And you try again to help, and still there's some. But sometimes I think for us it can be hard to see that the effort itself is like, what's the word? Brings good results. I'll share one other thing about that. Actually, I was talking to Kens Rinpoche about this topic recently, and he was pointing out, for example, that actually he gave the example of the 5. When the Buddha became enlightened, right? After the Buddha became enlightened, remember he had been meditating with these 5 ascetics. Remember, you've heard that story, right? So he'd been meditating with 5 ascetics, right? And they were like ascetics who wouldn't eat anything, right? And then the Buddha ate some porridge with like milk and what's it called, like rice, like very good porridge. And then he got some strength, and then he became enlightened and a Buddha, right? And then when he was coming to those 5 disciples, remember the story? They were like, oh, he ate something. Like, let's ignore him. Let's snub him. Well, it's kind of funny, right? Like kids, we'll pretend he's not there. And then they say, then the Buddha, as he got closer, he was in the deer park in India, right? Those monks were meditating in deer park. And as the Buddha came, right, then they saw like his aura of enlightenment. They realized, they could feel that he had transformed, And even though they planned to snub him, then they all stood up, kind of like that. And he taught them the 4 Noble Truths, and they say that immediately they all became arhats, right? Like they all realized emptiness and so on right then. So like one thing Kens Rinpoche, Kens Rinpoche is saying, so why is it that those 5 people, as we've heard those 4 Noble Truths, we didn't become arhat. And actually we heard it with interest, right? Like we go, oh, I'm going to go and I want to hear this, and we listen and then we meditate on it, and then, we don't become arhat. For them, they were actually kind of snubbing him, and boom, they became enlightened so quickly. And the story is that actually they had been giving the Buddha a hard, like in other words, what's how to say this? Like in past lives, over and over again, the Buddha had done compassionate actions to them and dedicated, right? So like when they were 5 tigers, right? The little baby tigers, he fed his body to the mother so they wouldn't die. When they were, like all different times, and each time he developed a very strong karmic relationship to them, and he prayed for them, right? Now, when they were tigers, they did become enlightened. When they were this, and so on, lifetime after lifetime. But, what's there to say? He brought them closer and closer, so then in that lifetime, just hearing it once, they could become enlightened. So the point is like, even if our help doesn't help immediately, right? Like I was saying earlier about the Dalai Lama in terms of a long-term political view about nonviolence, but the same goes relationally with it on an individual level. Is if we invest that kind of love and compassion, You have to, what's the word? If you understand karma, then you know it will bear positive fruit. Does that make sense? Like, because it was like an action done out of love, right? If it's done out of love, dedicated to the welfare of others, then it has to bring a good result. Does that make sense? So like when we did that for, like just now, I suggested that we dedicate for Beth, right? Now, do I know if that'll lead to a good result tomorrow for her? No idea. Who knows? I have no idea that. But the idea is karmically, right? If you do an action out of love and you dedicate it for somebody, it will bring a good result relationally sometime for that person. It may be next week, or it may be 5 lifetimes from now. I don't have the wisdom to know that. But we can say, based on the teaching on karma, karma is definite, right? That's one of the guidelines of karma. So if you do an action out of love and compassion, then for sure that brings a good result. There's no doubt. Does that make sense? So I just was louder. Yeah. So that's that. Any questions though before we go on to meditate on the faults of self-charity or comments? I'll ask you guys a question though. Do you find that hard, like, to trust? I like when I say that, right? Like if you look at the Dalai Lama or Lama Zopa or any Buddha or Bodhisattva, right? Whereas they know that if you do an action out of compassion, the result is positive. So they have complete faith in that. You can see that with Lama Zopa, right? Like in other words, you see, I've seen that so much where he does these incredible actions, right? And sometimes they bring like amazing success externally, and sometimes like, he'll do some like huge action for somebody and then they blow it off, like whatever, they go and they just disappear and don't do it. Like you make some huge effort and then the person doesn't respond. But Lama Zopa, he never gets upset because he knows there's a good result from that. I'm just asking, like, is it hard to have? Do you find it sometimes hard to have faith in that? That if you do an action out of sincere love, is it hard to have faith that yes, this will bring a good result, and to not worry then? Or do you sort of feel like, well, I want to see the result now? I find that hard sometimes. That's why
I find it hard to trust, let it go.
Yeah, to trust and to not have expectations. But the expectations are always based on the ego. That's the difference, right? They're based on self-cherishing. Like, I want the result, in a sense, is like, I have an agenda of how reality should be, and it should be according to my plan, which is totally unrealistic.
Is it sometimes because we look on the other side? Like, I look on the other side, meaning like, I'm worried about the world, the world, if you do the Dhamma, then what happens,
You mean you worry that...
how am I going to eat, so...
You worry about yourself, you mean eating or something?
Yeah, like that. You focus on Dhamma like that, then you worry about the other part too.
Yeah.
Because you come up with an excuse to say like, okay, the teachers, they are monks, they come out of, they are monks, they have their, stuff like that. So how can I compare myself to them?
Yeah, well, one thing I would say though is this, is like, in this sense, it's not like a, so to say it, like, it's not, we don't have to, of course we can't compare in a certain way to them, that's different, but still we can it's to think like I'll give an example, like sometimes I think this way, like Lama Zopa was saying, Lama Zopa was saying this, he said like how, if somebody can just sit down, right, Lama Zopa sometimes I heard him once explain this, he said, if a person just sits down and thinks in their mind sincerely, not just thinks that they're here, but thinks like in their heart, right, like, right now, I don't need anything. Like, I have enough food, I have a place to sleep, there's nothing I need, right? And then, so you think, so I'm not doing this for anything. There's nothing for me, right, because I have enough right now. So it's not saying give away, even. It's not saying give away all your food, right? It's saying there's enough food in the refrigerator, and I have a place, a house, or roof, and bed, and all that. He said, and then you start reciting Om Mani Padme Hum like we were for others. Right, like, so you think, okay, so right now there's nothing for me. I'm not reciting this for me. I don't need like more peace because I feel peaceful. I don't need more stuff. I don't need more fame. I don't need more reputation. I don't need other people to think I'm something good or bad. It doesn't really matter right now, at least for now, You don't have to think forever because that becomes like too much. Like right now there's nothing in the world I need. And he says, so then you think like that, and then you recite Om Mani Padme Hum, meditating for others, right? For all beings. And then he said, that's a perfect Dharma practice, He was saying that, he said like some people, he said like even if you haven't studied extensively or you haven't like, some scholar, or he said like if you can just do that, right? Because there's a thought, he called it the thought of no need, right? In your mind. That was what he said it, the way he said it, which I thought was very nice. Like in other words, there's nothing I need. It's just simple, right? There's nothing I need now. But if you start thinking there's never anything, well, then you can think, oh, well, like maybe someday I'll be hungry, and then. But he said, like, so just think. So I think that what's useful is just go, for now, I'm okay. So there's nothing for me. So for now, it's just for others. You know what I mean? And you can do that for an hour, right? And then sometimes you can do it for 2 hours. You know what I mean? Like, and then like you don't have to compare. Am I equal to, you know, like, can I do the deeds of the Dalai Lama? Or so that's, you know, we can't do that thing, but we can start with those kind of things, right? Like, or then like you go somewhere to help somebody, and they think, okay, at least today, there's nothing I need from this person. Like, you know, I don't, like, at least for this moment, I'm doing it with pure love, and I don't care, even if they spit on me, it doesn't matter. Like that. You know, like, you could do that, right? Like for one little moment, you know what I mean? Like for say, okay, for 1 hour I can do that. You know, so I'm gonna help this person, and actually I would like it if they call me, if they insult me for helping them, that'll be good, that's all the better. Like, I don't care. You could do it for like you know what I mean? Like for 1 hour, or for 2 hours, or for a half hour. And then maybe that's how it expands, I think.
So what are you practicing at that time? Like, what is that?
That's actually giving up the 8 worldly concerns, right? And then practicing bodhicitta. So it's 2 parts. One is you have to give up the 8 worldly concerns, right? If you think, I don't care if they spit on me,
like
I don't need anything. Yeah, contentment, yeah. Actually, I think giving up the 8 worldly concerns is contenting, actually. Whereas if you're content, if you're really content, it means you don't need something, right? Like, you don't need fame, you don't need reputation, you don't need comfort, you don't need more stuff, you don't need
Yeah,
more
but I
money.
like how you say, and don't think about the future,
Yeah.
think about now, because you're right. If you think like that, it becomes like hard.
Yeah, because for me, if I think right now I don't need anything, that's easy, you know. But if I start getting into, well, will I ever? Well, then it becomes like, well, I don't know. Maybe someday having a reputation will be important to me. 5 years, you know, it becomes some kind of weird, like you know, what if I'm, whatever. You know, what if I get in a car wreck and then somebody's there, and if I have a better reputation than one else, you know? But that's who knows? Like, that's just silly. Like, it becomes some silly mind trip or something. So it seems much more healthy to just say, right now, I don't need anybody's praise. Like, it doesn't matter. Whereas I don't need people like to think, oh, Lauren's so great, or it doesn't matter. Like, whereas like I can just be here. Lama Zopa said that. He said like he was saying, if you could do that, he said some verse, like it was from some teaching or something. But he said like the person who can have that kind of thought of no need in their mind, right? And then he said, even if they're just laying around on their sofa, right? Like they have so much happiness, like of contentment, that other people will never know. Like, so he was pointing out, like, the person doesn't have to be some great yogi or some, he was saying, like, maybe it wasn't sofa in Tibet, it was like on a cushion or something, or like laying around. But it was some verse like that from Tibetan. It said, like, the person who has that thought of not needing anything in that moment, right? And then if they're just laying around, like, reciting some mantra or something, it said, like, then the happiness of that person's heart is more than ordinary somebody else who doesn't know the secret of that mind. That they'll never have that until they learn that secret, because it's the thought, it's a certain state of mind, right? But yeah, I think it has to be in the moment, right? Like, but if you do that one moment and then another moment and then another moment, then it becomes like, yeah. And I think for me anyway, I'm just saying my own experience, it becomes a mistake if I start to go, will I ever care? Like if I say I don't care, I don't need anything for comfort right now, right? Well, that's easy and it makes sense, right? You can experience. Whereas if I say, will I ever care about comfort? Well, what if someday I'm sick and I have a bad heart pain? You know, then maybe I'll. And then it becomes like an intellectual game or something that doesn't help. So I think it's much better to just say, right now, I don't need anything.
Makes a world of a difference if you think like that.
Yeah, because otherwise the 8 worldly concerns sneak in, right? Like. And then you can see how actually those verses, right, like the 8 verses of mind training actually apply, right? Here's if you're practicing like that, right? For let's say you're doing that and you're saying, for this hour I don't care, right? And then like, you know, and then somebody mistreats you with abuse and insults, right? Like if you prepared like that, then it's like, oh, cool. Like, you know, you could actually imagine being like this, right? Like if you say, I'm never going to care if anybody insults me. Like, but isn't it true? Like if I say, I never in my life am ever going to care again if somebody insults me. Well, that's like kind of phony, right?
Yeah.
That would be pretense, actually. Right? It'll be a pretend thing. But if you train your mind like first, and you say, okay, right now I'm really trying to practice purely, right? And then like somebody says, what you're doing is so stupid. You know, it's like, oh, this is cool. Like I'm really not doing it, because like you could be like, no, I don't care. Like that's so good. You know, like. You know, it's like you could actually feel this sense of, you know, and you might say to the person, oh, thanks, that's great, or something like that. Like, you know, in that moment, you could imagine for a moment doing that, right? If you're really, like, practicing like that, like, I don't care what people think or something. Yeah, I'll share one. I was going to share one funny story about that. Reba Rinpoche, like his late teacher, Lama Zopa's guru, he once said that. He said that when he was like doing, like when he was in, like I guess he was from Kham, right, a certain region, right, where he was famous, but then he was like in a different part of Tibet where he wasn't so famous, right. He was doing retreats, and he said it was like helping his mind so much. He was with Bwang Rinpoche doing retreats, right. It was helping his mind so much. And like, because nobody cared about him, right? Nobody thought he was anything special, and so he hadn't the thought of Noni. Then he said, then he went back to Kham, and everybody was like, oh, and they wanted to give him gifts, and like, they were like honoring him, so he was young, But he went back to his home area where he was very respected. And they said, oh, it was terrible for my Dharma practice. Like suddenly the thought comes, oh, they think this, then I have to act like that, then what will they think? Mm-hmm. And then he said, oh, then he was like, oh, this, then he was like threw all that off, or something, because it was like, it ruined it, you have so much mental peace when you don't care, but then if people are like that, right, then they had all these expectations of him, so then for a moment, it sounded like for a moment he felt like, oh, he was taking those expectations on.
Right.
Like starting to feel like, oh, then I have to do this and this, they'll think I'm like that. And then he thought, oh, that's sick, like that's sickening or something, like forget it.
Right.
Sorry, you
Yeah, that's the kind of question I was going to ask. Because I was we put ourselves in a situation where we want to achieve those stuff, right? We want people to praise us, It's like we put ourselves, we put ourselves in a situation where we want people to say, oh, you're doing good, you're doing amazing. So that's what we're doing every day. So we're working for that.
Yeah, then it's not,
Yeah.
that's not Dharma practice then.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, you got, well, going off a little bit, you guys, I always like the story also, there's a story of, I think it was, what's his name, who wrote the words of my, Patrul Rinpoche or something? There are a few stories in Tibet, like, I always like this one, where he was supposed to go teach at some monastery, right, and like, he was a very high lama who was like the teacher of many other teachers, but he escaped from his entourage, like he snuck off, and then he was wearing cheap robes or something, and he showed up at the monastery, and like they didn't recognize him, and they said hi, like, so he was just a monk who wandered up, and they were like, hi, can we help you? And he said something like, yeah, well actually I'm here to help you, what can I do? And they said, oh yeah, we could use some help in the kitchen, we need help with like cleaning up, and like he didn't say who he was, he just said, how can I help? And they were like, actually we could use some help in the kitchen. So then like he was chopping vegetables, and then they said like, oh, the guy in the, like maybe the head person in the kitchen or something, oh, can you sweep up? So he's like cleaning the kitchen, like, and then his entourage arrives, and they say, oh, Rinpoche went ahead, we can't find him, have you seen Rinpoche? And they were like, no, we haven't seen anybody. And the entourage was like, okay, we better look for him, and they're like, look, and then finally one of his entourage goes like, see somebody like cleaning, like scrubbing, and he said, that's him, and then the abbot was like, oh no, like, it was so embarrassed, so whatever, but the idea is like that, right, like, I mean, that is getting at the same point of your question in a way, is like he was I think that was the teaching. I mean, that was probably a better teaching than whatever, I mean, I'm sure he then went up and taught something verbally, but like that itself is the teaching, right? Like, it's funny. Yeah. Okay, so let's meditate on the faults of self-cherishing next. So the first thing, if we're going to meditate on the faults of self-cherishing, is that we have to recognize what is, first you have to know what is self-cherishing, right? Like in other words, self-cherishing is just two words, right? Self-cherishing. But actually, what is it referred to in our experience? Like real experience for you, for me, for us. So actually, one way to get at that, like there are many ways to try to understand that in our experience, but one way to get at it is like, since we were talking about the 8 worldly concerns, right? Is that, self-cherishing is not one of the list of 8 worldly concerns, but they all come from it, actually. So in other words, when you care that people like you, right? And you don't want them to not like you. So you want people to like you and say, like, smile and say nice things, and not like frown and look nauseated when you walk up, right? Like there's some feeling like that in your heart, right? So you have to check deeper in your heart, right? where does that feeling come from? That I want people to smile and like me and say nice things, and not frown and dislike me and say harsh things. So it comes from some kind of like feeling in my, if you check, right, in your chest, like inside you, emotionally, right, there's some kind of a feeling of like self-importance, you could call it, like of cherishing yourself, right? And you can check this, like let's just use that example, right, of people saying nice things. That actually, if somebody else, right, like in other words, if somebody you don't particularly like, right, like say even actually, if you see like a political figure from any country, right, on TV, who you really dislike their view, right, and then they arrive somewhere and people boo them, you like that, actually, right? Actually, you feel happy, right? You know what I mean? Like when you see that they walk in, right, and then people are like, oh, like criticizing them, right? Then you feel some. So like, in other words, whereas if that happened to you, you would feel upset, right? If you walk into a room and people booed you, you would for sure feel uncomfortable, right? So it's some feeling that you cherish yourself, very different from how you feel towards them. We're just trying to like find what self-cherishing is, right? Or like when you see an object that you really like, right? Like whether it's, like ice cream or sweets or, clothing item or something, right? An item in the store, right? Then there's a feeling in your chest, right? When you say, I want that, right? It's not just words, but there's a feeling of cherishing of I, right? That's different from others, right? You know, like it's not like I'd be just as happy if somebody else had that ice cream cone. No, it's I want it, right? I want people to like me. I want praise. There's a feeling of cherishing I, and that I want that, and almost like I deserve that, and if I don't get that, or I don't deserve it, but either way, actually, it becomes a self-cherishing. Right? But it's like referencing everything in relation to that I in your chest. Like, how much attention did they pay to me? You get home and you could think, what was their impression of me? Oh, did I say something smart or did I say something stupid? Did I seem like impressive or not impressive? Right? So self-cherishing is not something intellectualized. It's like a habitual experience that's there, right in the middle of you feel it right there in your chest, right? This feeling like, right, in those examples from the 8 verses, right, of Mind Training. Like if there's somebody you think you really trust and really like, and then suddenly you heard that they like told somebody they hate you and think you're terrible. Right? There'll be a strong visceral feeling in your chest, right? If like you thought they were your best friend, right? Person who cherished you so much, and then somebody else came along and said, oh, just yesterday they were telling me they think you're an idiot. They can't stand the sight of you. There'd be this like horrible feeling that would arise in the middle of my chest, right? Because they harm my self-cherishing. So those 8 verses are just ways of understanding what is self-cherishing, right? So you can actually feel it, right? When you get what you want, when somebody hands you the ice cream cone, when somebody says, oh, you're the most brilliant person I've ever met, you're so wonderful, right? You're great. Then like one feeling arises in it right there, right? On the other hand, like when when the other things happen, right? If you walked in a room and suddenly somebody spit in your face, right? Immediately this huge feeling would arise inside you. Right? If it happened to somebody else, you might laugh, right? But if it happened to me, wow, that feeling would arise for sure. Whether it was humiliation or embarrassment or anger, it depends on you, but for sure some feeling would arise like that. So then comes the contemplation, what are the faults of that kind of self-cherishing? Cherishing ourselves more than others. Self-importance. And notice that feeling, right? That's not, just to clarify, right? We're talking about an actual experience of a feeling. That feeling is not self-care. Right? That's not do you take care of yourself. That's a feeling. Right? That's different from a behavior. Sometimes people get confused and think that self-cherishing, to give up self-cherishing means you don't take care of yourself. Right? But it's not. That's not what we're talking about at all here. Right? We're talking about that particular kind of feeling, right? Of an emotional pattern, and a pattern of feeling that in your chest, right? And then behaving based on that. That doesn't have to do with you take care of yourself or not. It's a feeling that I'm more important, that what happens to me is more important than what happens to others. That things should go according to my expectation, should never not go according to my expectation. That my happiness or reputation or comfort or status is more important. It's like that geocentric delusion, right? The idea that everything revolves around me. It's that kind of delusional idea and feeling pattern. So what are the faults of that? So if we look in the world, right, for sure, right, actually, all hatred comes from that. Like hating other groups, right, always comes from self-cherishing. Right? Feeling I'm so important, therefore mine is good and others are bad, right, and then we hate them sometimes. So all hatred for sure comes from self-cherishing. All jealousy, right? And envy, feeling unhappy that people have things, wanting what they have. Definitely, no doubt, right? You can see experientially, anytime you feel envy or hate, they come from self-cherishing. All like uncontrollable craving, right? And like ruminating, when you can't sleep or you can't rest, you're ruminating and worrying about something, right? Also, all like anxiety, for sure they come from self-cherishing. Right? This is not like, to be clear, this is criticizing self-cherishing. It's not criticizing us, it's criticizing a mental habit. I'm sure, though, when you're anxious and worrying all the time, right, it comes from some kind of, that feeling in your chest of self-cherishing, and then, worrying about what do people think of you, or how something is going to go, or how you're going to look when this happens. How are you going to appear, right, and so on, or what's going to happen to you or yours, and so on, right? All that anxiety for sure is grounded in the habit of self-cherishing that we've been familiar with since beginning this time. Any feeling of hopelessness, right, comes from self-cherishing. Of like despair, right? Actually, if you notice if you imagine the feeling of despair, actually, if you analyze it introspectively, right in the middle of it, in the middle of your chest, there's the self-cherishing there, right? Anger and disliking others, for sure comes from, right in the middle of your chest, there's self-cherishing there. Right, when you're longing and pining for something, right, the self-cherishing is there. Right? The kind of samsaric heartbreak, right, of losing what you have, right? If you remember back to moments when you've had that, self-cherishing was there, right in the middle of your chest. I lost my boyfriend, my girlfriend, my whatever it was. So from those things, right, then for sure, right, there's no doubt all wars come from self-cherishing. Right? All wars were begun by somebody cherishing themselves more than others, right? Exaggerating their self-importance, the importance of their comfort, their status, their reputation, their whatever. All greed, right, and stealing, thefts, whether it's like an individual, somebody robbing somebody, or thefts on Wall Street and places like that, for sure they come from self-cherishing. All the hypocrisy, the lying, deceit in the world, they come from self-cherishing. All the, in Buddhism calls sometimes sexual misconduct, right? Like, affairs and other sexual behaviors that hurt other people, right? Obviously they come from self-cherishing, right? Caring more about one's own temporary, in that moment, happiness, right, than you care about others. All like duplicitous stuff in the world, phoniness, comes from self-cherishing. Then all the problems in the families. Right? In other words, they certainly don't come from mutual love, right, and care. Right? They come from like one person is self-cherishing, right, and then they become one person seems to be self-cherishing, then the other then that contradicts the wishes of the other person's self-cherishing, and you have two self-cherishings in conflict, and it leads to so many problems. So whether it's problems in a workplace, between coworkers, problems with cousins or distant relatives, problems with one's parents or children, friends with boyfriend, girlfriend, spouses, and so on, right? They all start with self-cherishing, right? I want this, or I don't like that, I want that, and I don't like this, right? And then it escalates from there. And you can actually feel it, right? If you think back to times when you've had those kind of conflicts, whether at work or with a parent, with a child, friends, right? If you think back to those moments, for sure self-cherishing was there right in the middle of your heart, right? And the more miserable you got, the more entrenched and the more like vivid your self-cherishing was, actually, if you check. The more miserable you are, the more strong, actually, you can feel the self-cherishing in your heart. When you have that other thought, like no need, actually you don't see so much of the self-cherishing. Right? When you're really feeling miserable, right, it's because self-cherishing leads to that misery and it strengthens in those times. Right? The more afflictive emotions you have, the more self-cherishing is strong. So then also, one other thing, right? So we saw like all the problems in the world, right? Greed, hatred, prejudice, war. They come from self-cherishing. All the psychological problems, right? All the inner emotional problems, in other words. The emotional problems also all come from the root. They grow up from that root of self-cherishing. And then also all negative karma. All the negative actions we do, right? They all come from self-cherishing. Actually, when you do an action grounded in self-cherishing, by its very nature it becomes, usually it's a clear negative karma. And those actions never lead to Buddhahood. So like when I follow my cravings and desires, right, creating negative karma, it's always grounded in my self-cherishing. When I get angry at other people, it's always grounded in my self-cherishing. When I use harsh words, it's always that. When I follow the 8 worldly concerns, right, it's always because of my self-cherishing. Every time I have ever harmed another person, it's because of my self-cherishing. And why, like the Buddha, he became a Buddha, right? And Tara, she became a Buddha. Right? Why have I not yet become a Buddha? only because of my self-cherishing. Otherwise, I would have generated bodhicitta long ago, realized emptiness, progressed along the stages and paths. Right? But actually, self-cherishing is the biggest obstacle to practicing the bodhisattva way of life. So actually, if this subject, the faults of self-cherishing, is incredibly vast, right, as we're contemplating. Actually, in a certain way, then you can see all sufferings, actually, right? Everything from just like a little negative karma, and also a little argument in the family, all the way up to my not being a Buddha, comes from that mental habit, that emotional habit that we saw earlier, right? That's not some intellectual thing, it's an experience in my chest, in my body, in my mind. It's actually in your mind, but you experience it like there in your chest, right? It's a mental thing, but you experience it like right there, viscerally. So that's actually the cause of all my suffering. So Atisha's guru, Dharmarakshita, says, now hold on to that. Like really hold on to, like almost like you're wrestling with somebody. Hold on to that recognition of what self-cherishing is, and of how it's dragged you. Like really think of self-cherishing like an enemy, right? Like a demon in your heart. And like hold on to it for a moment, and really like try to recognize, wow, you separate yourself. In other words, you're not self-cherishing. Self-cherishing is a thing there in your heart that's different from you, right? So imagine that you're holding that self-cherishing in your mind, or with your mind. And really, like, for a moment, like, talk to your self-cherishing. Right? You, self-cherishing, have dragged me through samsara for countless eons. Right? You've dragged me through hell, through all kinds of horrible rebirths. All my sufferings in this life, from the moment I was born until now, right? Either you directly created them, by giving rise to afflictive emotions and problems, conflicts with others, or you indirectly created them by making me do bad actions in past lives that led to suffering results now. If I don't destroy you now, I'll never achieve liberation, I'll never achieve Buddhahood. You are actually the worst of all demons. And among sicknesses, you're the worst sickness. Among, horrors, you're the worst horror. Because actually, if you think of the horrors of war, of torture, of poverty, of greed, actually you're the cause of all those. Those things are horrible, but actually you're the cause of them, and since you cause all of them, you're actually more horrible. So now, self-cherishing, I'm not going to forget who you are. Now I recognize you're my only enemy. Actually, I have no external enemies, really. I only have one enemy, and it's you. For a while, and then do giving for a while. You don't have to switch every time. And sometimes that makes it easier to get better at it. And then you can do, and then in daily life you do the switching more. Sometimes that makes it easier, actually. Because again, you have to be pretty fast, right, to do taking, switch, and then giving. And so when and sometimes it helps to do it really slowly when you're sitting in meditation. And then, if you're out somewhere traveling around, then you want to apply it, then you can do the faster version. Because it's a little bit like that. It's a little bit almost, I don't know, like learning let's say a dance move or something. Whereas if it's not so easy to do that when you're actually dancing if you don't first do it really slowly, alone or something. Not that I dance, but I'm trying to give an example. Just sort of going slower can help. Because it's also a fairly, the whole thing, when you put it all together, is like a fairly sophisticated meditation. That's why, but also by being good at it, is that it's sophisticated almost or something. But there's a simplicity to it. You don't have to be it's not intellectual or something, but it's sort of, there are a lot of steps. And then, so regarding the benefit, yes, so it transforms difficult circumstances into the path. You can do it any time. And also, I'll say this too, just because it's been my experience with quite a few people, let's put it that way, is that also if you familiarize yourself with Tonglen, then, to use the way Rebbe used to say it, I think was something like this, that other meditations might possibly abandon you when things get really difficult in life. Whereas like because they're too difficult, you know. But if you get good at Tonglen, no matter how difficult things get, it'll never abandon you. That's one. And he said, even when you're dying, actually, it won't abandon you. Like, in other words, it'll help. You know, it's like other meditations, you may not be able to do them when you're dying. You may be able to do them when you're sick. You may not be able to do them. But Tonglen, you know, even under the worst circumstances, helps. And actually, I'll say this is really true. And I'll share one. Actually, I'm going to share a personal example with that. Like of actually my own mom. One time, she's not, you know, she meditates, but she's not like, you know, she's not like studying extensively Buddhism or that kind of thing. But she's like a very heartfelt person, sincere, and she likes meditation. And she had practiced Tonglen some for a while. And then at one point, some years ago, she had to have like a brain tumor in her brain, and she had to have a surgery, and then the surgery was very difficult. And then after the surgery, she fell. They didn't put the thing up in her bed, like right after surgery, you know, like you're delirious, right? And she fell out of bed and smashed her head. So after having brain surgery, she smashed her head and was like terrible, like, you know, situation. And so she was like incredible pain and like confusion, you know, because it's your brain, right? Like, and you know, Rinpoche had said this comment, but then actually my mom said to me, she said, when she was like all that pain and confusion, she said, then she suddenly Tonglen, she just started doing Tonglen. And she said, and then she knew she'd be okay, you know, like, and she was. And that's like, so I thought, wow, that's just what you know, as the teachings say, that's what happens. I can say from my own experience with my own mom, it really is. Like, in other words, you know, she hadn't done like long retreats on Tonglen, she had just done it in daily life the way we are. You know, like, it wasn't like, you know, she wasn't going off in like some Himalayan, you know, she lives in Florida and, you know, goes to the mall. But, you know, and she was like doing some Tonglen because she thought it was a beautiful meditation on love and compassion. But just what Rinpoche said would happen is what happened. Like, in other words, under the worst circumstances, when she forgot everything else, she could remember that. You know, because it's like something very deep, especially when you're suffering, that you can connect to the suffering of others in a very heartfelt way, and your suffering becomes meaningful, not just like intellectually, but experientially. And yeah, and for me, that also gave me more confidence that what Rinpoche, you know, because she was like in a state where she wasn't dying, but it was like that, you know, in a way, like where your mind is not, you know, you're under pain and you're in the hospital and you're confused and you're, you know, like, and that really convinced me also that it's true that then, you know, if she could do that at that time, then a person like her, like an ordinary person, could do that when they're dying also. There's like teachers that said that, but I thought, oh wow, that proves it's true, really. It really is. So it's a very good meditation. Like, so if you, I'll say also actually Rinpoche, when he said that, also said, I mean, it's different because he's like a high lama, but he actually made that point about, you know, in Tibet, he had gotten captured, right, and was tortured by the, you know, like a Chinese gulag kind of thing. And he had said the same, he had said that the Tibetans who hadn't learned this, right, then their suffering was totally meaningless. It was just horrific, you know, like with no meaning, like there was nothing, they had no refuge, right? And he said, but he and the others who had actually learned Tonglen, right, and even though the physical suffering was terrible, like this didn't abandon, even in prison being tortured, it didn't abandon him. So wow, that's pretty good, you know, like, so I can say like I've known real people, like quite a few people in my life where, as I say, Tonglen, it is what the teachings say literally is proven to be true in people's experience where, you know, whether it's, you know, in a hospital under bad circumstances or in a prison or in some, is that Tonglen really is a practice that doesn't abandon you or something like that. You know, like in other words, it'll always be there for you if you practice, but not if you just read about it. You know, you have to practice it a little bit, otherwise it doesn't. You can't. In other words, if you don't actually practice it, then of course it's not really in your mind. But if you practice it some, then it'll come back. Does that kind of make sense? Like, I'm just sharing. So I'm just saying it's not just like the teachings say that, but really I've known many people, quite a few people, where that's been true for them. It really is true. So actually, let's do that. So let's go through it like kind of step by step, slowly, each step, you know, and then we'll. So the first step is actually, I think you have to connect it in a way. So like the idea is this: so we meditated on the faults of self-cherishing, right? So for Tonglen, you actually imagine. Some people leave this out, but I think it's important not to leave it out. So there are different ways to visualize, but I'm going to do the simplest one, which is you visualize self-cherishing as a dark seed in your own heart. Does that make sense? So like earlier we said it, that's where, and the reason why you're visualizing your heart is, remember earlier we said when somebody insults you or harms you, or else when you're really craving for something, you feel it there, right? So you visualize the seed there, right where you usually feel it, but you visualize it as something, as like a little dark cloud, a little dark seed or cloud of darkness or something, that just symbolizes your habit of cherishing yourself. And then we're going to do taking. And so taking is a practice of cultivating compassion. And so what you do in that is you think of you're going to take away suffering. So for us, there are different ways to start. Sometimes the Tibetan texts say to start with yourself, actually. But I think for Westerners, sometimes we're bad at compassion for ourselves, so maybe that's not. I don't know if that's a good way to start, because it might be hard. They're trying to find something easy, right? So the Tibetans say it should be easy to start with yourself. For us, sometimes that's not so easy, I think. So I'm going to start with, let's start with somebody who you love and care about, okay? Because that's pretty easy, right? So think of someone who you care about. It could be like, a loved one. Let's put it that way, a loved one. And think about, let's imagine a time in the future, right, when that loved one is going to be going through some really painful circumstance, because that happens to all of us, humans and sentient beings, right? Whereas things happen to us, we get sick, we get down, eventually we die, whatever. So think of a time in the future when that loved one is going to be, imagine a time in the future when they're going to be vulnerable and suffering, particularly suffering, right? More than they are now, let's say. And take a moment to really empathize with that suffering, right? So you imagine that loved one vulnerable, in difficult circumstances, and really going through some hard times. And generate the mind that cherishes them, right? That feels affection for them, that feels connected and warm towards them. And then try to get into the state of compassion, right? So the feeling of compassion is taking, right? That you want to take away that suffering. And so as you think of that person, really try to feel that through empathy and through compassion, through warmth, through your affection for them. Really feel like, wow, I would like to take that suffering away. I'd like to, so that they would never have to face that, actually. I wish I could take it away so they never will have to go through that. And as you cultivate that kind of mind, you're going to visualize or imagine that you can actually that your compassion itself sort of draws that suffering away from them. Almost like a dark cloud or a dark steam sort of lifts off of them, that is that suffering, and the cause of that suffering. Because that's what compassion does, right? It wishes to take it away. And imagine that your compassion draws that suffering from them towards you. And that you feel happy to be taking it from them. And that you take it into yourself, where it implodes upon that dark seed in your heart, destroying this, and the suffering and the dark seed kind of bring about a mutual destruction. Right? It kind of implodes and destroys. Let's do a little more taking. So think of other people. You can think of that same person or somebody else or a few people who you love. Right? Again, recognizing how they're already suffering, right? And they're subject to more suffering in the future. So really try to take, through again, though you don't just visualize, you have to actually try to empathize, right? Feel affection, warmth, cherishing that other, wanting them to be free from suffering and its causes. And then again, you imagine their suffering kind of rising up like a dark steam, or like a pollution cloud, or like, something like that. Your compassion, right, draws that suffering away from them towards you. You take it in, and you imagine it imploding upon the self-cherishing in your heart, destroying your self-cherishing. So the meaning is obvious, right? It's that compassion destroys self-cherishing. It's also a brave mind willing to face the suffering of others. Right? That visualization of being willing to take it in, right, is cultivating the brave compassion of a bodhisattva. Right? That you're not afraid of really engaging with others, really taking them into your heart, taking their suffering into your heart, which destroys self-centeredness. So again, now you can think of other people, or of all the people you care for, or other specific people you care for. Again, empathize, generate compassion. Imagine that your compassion pulls off their suffering, pulls it away from them, comes towards you, enters you, implodes into your heart, destroying the suffering and destroying the seed of self-cherishing in your heart. Try it, if you want, you can, we're just going to experiment a little bit. You can try also actually think of a particular suffering you sometimes have. Pick a particular suffering you sometimes have in your life. It could be like a physical problem or an emotional kind of suffering. So pick just one now, just for an example. And then think of all the beings who suffer from something like that. So if it's like worry or some kind of pain or some kind of illness, right? So think of how there are so many beings who suffer just like you do. And through your suffering, right, from that, use that to generate empathy for all those others who suffer. So you all suffer similarly, you all suffer together. So generate a sense of empathy and compassion for all the others who suffer like you do. Generate a sense of warmth and connectedness with them, right? That we're all the same in this way. We're all subject to that kind of suffering and so many other kinds of suffering. They're all so kind to me, my former mothers, my family, they're like brothers and sisters to me in samsara. So generating a sense of empathy and of warmth, connectedness with them. Then imagine that a dark cloud of everyone who suffers like you do in that way. It's like so a big dark cloud kind of rises up like steam from all of them, comes towards you, enters you, and implodes on the seed of self-cherishing in your heart. Actually, next, let's just think, since we've been meditating on today, of the suffering that people have, right, from being caught in their own self-cherishing. That beings who want to be happy are so confused, right? So infinite numbers of beings are so confused, right? They want to be happy, but they keep finding suffering. They don't know how to find the causes of happiness. They keep compelling themselves towards more suffering without meaning to. And generate that you're similar, you can generate empathy for that. Generate a sense of warmth and affection, that we're all the same in that way. And imagine that the dark cloud of their negative karma from self-cherishing, their self-cherishing itself, all the suffering that comes from their self-cherishing, again kind of rises up, a dark cloud, and out of your compassion for them, you draw it towards you, enters you, and implodes on your self-cherishing. You can also think of the suffering of the other people in this room. The ways the people in this room suffer, whether physically or, in the mind. We've been together all day, so generate a sense of your connectedness to each other, of empathy for the suffering of those others, and compassion for the other people in this room. Out of your compassion, you can imagine that their suffering, your compassion itself draws their suffering up off of them, like a dark cloud, like dark steam. Your compassion pulls it towards you. It enters you, implodes on your self-cherishing, completely obliterating it. Now we can also think of our own future selves. Right? So think of all the suffering that, like, you yourself may experience in the rest of your life. Right? Sufferings of loss, or of illness, or of, hardships, conflicts, and so on. Try to generate a sense of compassion for your future self. Compassion for you and for the seeds of suffering that are inside your life, inside you. Out of compassion for yourself, imagine that suffering rising up. Draw it towards your present self. It enters into you and implodes, destroying the seed of self-cherishing in your heart. Like you can imagine the suffering of other people here on Main Street in Fairfax. So many different kinds of suffering. And, using the insights you gained earlier on equanimity and cherishing others, generate a sense of affection, of cherishing them, of wishing they could be free from those sufferings. Imagine those sufferings kind of like rising up, being drawn towards you, entering into you, imploding on your self-cherishing, completely obliterating. You can think of the suffering of anyone or everyone, as many people as you want, in the Washington, D.C. area. There's so many different kinds of suffering. Again, overcoming our aversion, our indifference, our attachment. We just feel a sense of empathy for others, of connectedness with others, cherishing others, empathizing with their suffering. And out of compassion, drawing that suffering away from them, drawing it towards us. It enters into me, implodes on the seed of self-cherishing in my heart, completely destroying it. And so that's the meditation on taking. That's some example. So now we'll do the meditation on giving, the second half of this meditation. So for that, having destroyed the seed of self-cherishing in your heart, You now imagine that your heart is open, and spacious, filled with light that's in the nature of loving kindness, right? Because having destroyed self-cherishing, what's left is love. Is the loving mind that cherishes others. So you imagine that you have this open-hearted feeling, open-hearted visualization of radiance in your chest. And now you imagine giving. So you can start with, imagine like the people around you in this room, right? And imagine radiating out light to them, so that they feel everything they need, that they have enough resources, that they have peace of mind, that they have lives filled with love, wisdom, compassion, and that they all become, right, radiating out to them all the realizations of the stages and paths up to enlightenment itself, so that they all become fully enlightened Buddhas. Imagine the loved one who you started with today, in this Tonglen, and imagine radiating light to them, giving them every kind of happiness, temporary happiness, the happiness of love and compassion in their life, the happiness of wisdom, finally the happiness of enlightenment itself. Think of those people who suffer, who you thought of earlier, who suffer similar ways to you, how you do. And your loving heart radiates to them, giving them everything they need, everything they want that helps them and doesn't harm them. Filling them with healing, with well-being, with love, with health, with happiness, with joy, with enlightenment itself. You can imagine your heart of love like radiating light that completely fills this room, that radiates outward, filling Main Street here, granting everyone around you for blocks and blocks everything they want and need. Resources, security, safety, peace, peace in their families, peace in their communities, love, compassion, equanimity, joy, generosity, patience, ethics, joyful effort, meditative concentrations, wisdom, even to enlightenment itself. I feel like you can imagine that giving of love and of happiness extending outward, right? Like throughout the whole, like so that the National Mall, the Congressional Building, the White House, right? The Pentagon, every building, every street, every park, right? Every anthill. Like, so not just humans, but all beings, right? The rivers, like radiate with rays of loving kindness. So that all the people, the fish, the animals, insects, all experience love, peace, gratitude, joy. Imagine giving everything that everyone wants. So the whole place becomes like a blissful, pure realm. And imagine your love extending outward, granting everyone, everywhere, throughout the universe, everything they want and need up to enlightenment itself. So that's in brief the practice of giving. Then we'll do this one round of combining them. Just once. We'll do one round, and then we'll do more during the Guru Puja. But first let's do one round now of combining. So now, like, actually think of all, like, let's just pick a particular kind of suffering, like mental agitation, right? Like worry or anxiety or feeling agitated in their hearts. Right? So you think of all the suffering that beings go through, right? And you can empathize with that, right? That it's such an unpleasant kind of state, right? To always live with mental agitation. So you generate a sense of empathy, of cherishing, of understanding, and of compassion. And out of your compassion, the mental agitation of others rises away from them, like a dark cloud. Your compassion draws it towards you, draws it into you. It implodes the dark seed in your heart, completely destroying it. And all that's left is radiant light in your heart, of love. And then you radiate out peace of mind. So all those beings who previously were agitated now feel free from agitation. And then they receive peace, tranquility of mind, contentment, deep abiding peace and happiness. So we can come back. So that last one was the sense of how you combine the two, right? First we did them separately, just taking and just giving, and then you can combine them in one round, where you can do rounds like that, where you take and then give, take and then give. And in daily life, if you want, this I wouldn't suggest, because what I meant by good at it is like almost like adept, like used to it. Then there's a way where you can even combine those in the breath. It says that in the Guru Puja. It says, where with each in-breath you take on suffering, with each out-breath you give happiness. But you have to be pretty used to it, or else it doesn't, you know.
That was part I was kind of on that phone.
Yeah, you have to.
For me.
You have to do the slow way first, and then
Yeah.
eventually you can get where you're used to it. It's like riding a bicycle or something. I don't know. But you don't start with the breath. Actually, so maybe we'll do the Guru Puja. There's a certain point in the Guru Puja that there's a verse for Tonglen, so maybe let's do up to that verse, and then we'll stop and do some more Tonglen. And then we'll do the dedications from the Guru Puja will be our dedications for the day also.